Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Government orders, government bills, comments. Resuming debate on Bill C-76, Elections Modernization Act at report stage, and on the motions in group number 1.
The honourable member for Thornhill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'll pick up where I left off before the Liberals imposed the legislative guillotine to cut off debate. Madam Speaker, my greatest concern about Bill C-76 is the Liberal claim that it will combat and control third-party spending. It does not properly address a problem which could have been easily solved if, and this is a big if, this Liberal government actually wanted to solve it. At first glance, it appears that the legislation might contain foreign financial interference by setting some spending limits and requiring third parties to have a dedicated Canadian bank account. But, Madam Speaker, Bill C-76 doubles the total maximum third-party spending amount allowed during the writ period, and it still allows unlimited contributions from individual donors and others, and unlimited spending by third parties and unlimited foreign donations outside the pre-writ and writ periods. Now, some of our Liberal colleagues claim foreign financial interference has been adequately blocked, but the reality, Madam Speaker, is that a huge loophole exploited in recent elections in increasingly larger amounts of foreign funding of third parties still exists. Foreign charities like the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in New York or the American Tides Foundation in San Francisco can give millions of foreign dollars to Canadian charities like the Canadian Tides Organization or Lead Now or the Dogwood Initiative or the Sisu Institute, and those millions can be dispersed as Canadian dollars to third-party groups to support parties and candidates of their choice and to oppose parties and candidates of their choice. Elections Canada can do nothing without new legislation. C-76 does nothing to stop these effectively laundered American dollars being used as they were in 2015 to work to defeat a Conservative government, and next year, Mr. Speaker, to attempt to re-elect this Liberal government. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the Canada Revenue Agency, before the 2015 federal election, had been working to audit 42 registered Canadian charities for political activity, and there is research, Madam Chair, accumulated by the skilled investigative journalist and researcher Vivian Krause that indicates 41 of the 42 audited charities were not fully compliant with the law, and that the CRA recommended or would have recommended that at least 5 of these so-called charities be disqualified, shut down completely. But in 2016, Madam Speaker, the CRA shut down those audits without reporting, coincidentally after the Revenue Minister issued a mandate letter that directed her to, quote, allow charities to do their work free from political harassment, end quote. Mr. Speaker, Ms. Krause testified last week before the Ethics Committee that she spent 6 months in 2016 writing a report which she submitted to Elections Canada. Elections Canada sent investigators to Vancouver to meet with Ms. Krause, and she testified that after extensive discussion, it became clear to her that Elections Canada can do anything if the Canada Revenue Agency allows charities to Canadianize foreign funds. Madam Speaker, the Income Tax Act is very clear that charities are to operate for purposes that are charitable as defined by law. And while charities have been able to get away with it by pointing to language that permits a limited amount of political activity, the original intent, Madam Speaker, was that the political activity was intended to further a charitable purpose. If that political activity doesn't support a charitable purpose, Madam Speaker, then the allowable political activity should be, as Ms. Krause pointed out very clearly before committee, absolutely zero. So in wrapping up, Madam Speaker, and while there are admittedly some modest improvements made to Bill C-76, it remains a deeply deficient attempt to restore fairness to the Canadian election process. It is a testament, Madam Speaker, to this Liberal government's deliberate decision, as with Bill C-50 before it, to leave loopholes that they believe enhance their efforts to save their political skins in 2019. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his comments today on Bill C-76, a bill we think has strengthened the ability for Canadians to vote that was taken away from the party opposite. One of the things that amended at committee that has happened, an amendment that was accepted at committee, was to add additional punishments for third parties who are found guilty of offences related to the use of foreign funds. It's interesting that the Conservatives are saying you're not doing enough, but they voted against that in committee. Now, this was an amendment put forward from the honourable member from Coast Bays, Newfoundland, and it was also one that was supported by Senator Frum in her legislation. And yet the Conservatives felt that they had to vote against something. I'm just wondering, did they vote against it because it was put forward by a Liberal, or did they vote against it because it strengthened the legislation?
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Well, Madam Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for the deflecting question. I believe the larger question comes back to the fact that this government, in the mandate letter to the Minister of National Revenue, gave her pretty clear direction that the CRA audit of questionable Canadian charities, which were Canadianizing American charitable dollars to be used by third parties, and the donors of these original American dollars basically bragged that they were using them, they were sending them to Canada to defeat the sitting Conservative government. Madam Speaker, that's the larger issue that we're addressing here today, the fact that Elections Canada should have been enabled by this legislation, this deficient legislation, C-76, to allow and to ask the Canada Revenue Agency to make clear exactly where the money trail leads from American dollars through American charitable agencies to Canadian charitable agencies, then dispersed to third parties, and third parties, as Ms. Krause reminded us, they can throw the mud in an election campaign while the party, the Liberal Party in this case, could claim to take the high road.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've been sitting with my honourable colleague at the Ethics Committee, where we've been studying the ability of third-party operators to monkey-wrench the electoral process. We see that Europe is warning of a digital electoral arms race. We've seen the effects of Brexit and the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and yet this government refused to take the all-party consensus regarding the necessity of putting political parties under a credible privacy regime to limit the potential of political parties from using the new dark arts of digital manipulation of voters. And I'd like to ask my honourable colleague what he thinks about the credibility of the Liberal government's supposed electoral reform if they're ignoring all-party consensus on the need to have political parties accountable as well to protecting data and making sure that we're not manipulating voters through the kind of monkey-wrenching that went on with the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Well, Madam Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague, and it is indeed a pleasure to work with him in these recent months on the Ethics Committee in the study of the Cambridge Analytica Facebook aggregate IQ company here in Canada, which revealed the huge vulnerabilities to the Canadian democratic electoral process through new media. And yes, he's quite correct. The interim report of our committee in June before the House rose, Madam Speaker, recommended among a number of probably a dozen recommendations to the government that electoral activity in Canada, particularly activity by third parties in elections, be brought under the purview of the Privacy Commissioner, not for the Privacy Commissioner to regulate or interfere with political activity by political parties, but to ensure the privacy of Canadians from third-party interference and attempts to manipulate and contort the election results.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the Honourable Member for Edmonton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Le gouvernement du Canada.
The Government of Canada has heard the comments of Canadians, and we are very proud that the majority of the changes that are nonpartisan were included in the amendments passed at committee regarding this bill.
Was introduced, the Government of Canada introduced it as an initiative to modernize our electoral process and make it more transparent, accessible, and secure for all Canadians. Madam Speaker, one of the proposed amendments was to require all electors to be Canadian citizens when exercising their right to vote. Même si Élections Canada a toujours...
Even if Elections Canada has always required this of electors, the tabling of Bill C-76 permitted us to detect a mistake that was made during the drafting in the new Canada Elections Act, which came into force in the year 2000. The French version of the bill allowed one to interpret that a person who was planning to obtain Canadian citizenship before the day of the vote could vote ahead of time before their citizenship was confirmed. However, we cannot confirm that a person will become a Canadian citizen until they have made the oath.
Amendments made by the committee to Bill C-76 correct this error and clarify that only Canadians can cast a ballot in a ballot box. Madam Speaker, this will help to ensure the integrity of the entire electoral process. Former Chief Electoral Officer Mark Mayren has applauded the Government of Canada's efforts to modernize our electoral system and make it more accessible. However, he also mentioned that additional amendments should be made to facilitate the identification of electors who live in seniors' residences or in long-term care centres, because it could be difficult for seniors to prove where they live with an ID. And Madam Speaker, I think this is a great amendment, a great suggestion, because in a riding like Edmonton Centre with so many towers and so many seniors' residences, I have seen this particular voter ID difficulty for seniors be prevalent. The committee also adopted amendments to Bill C-76 that would make the electoral system more accessible for our seniors. And so now, from now on, senior centre employees will be allowed to cast ballots for senior citizens living in their place of work, providing they themselves can vote and live close to the senior centre. I know that the seniors at St. Andrews will be happy to hear this, Madam Speaker, as they live about a block away from my own house, and when it comes time to vote, they will be able to make sure that their voice is counted. La loi sur la modernisation des élections.
The Elections Modernization Act includes certain measures that are intended to ensure that political parties and third parties are on the same footing when exercising their right to participate in electoral activities.
From now on, third parties who intervene in the electoral process in any way will have to clearly explain their advertising messages. Also, third parties who spend more than $10,000 or who receive more than $10,000 in contributions will be required to submit financial reports to Elections Canada every 2 weeks, starting September 15th in a fixed election year. Elections Canada will publish these financial reports on their website, and these transparency measures will help Canadians better understand who is trying to influence their vote and why. Ce projet de loi vise aussi à...
This bill also intends to protect our democratic institutions against the attempts of influence by foreign entities. In their comments presented to committee, representatives of Elections Canada and the Federal Elections Commissioner recommended further increasing some of these protection measures. Many of these recommendations were accepted by the government.
Bill C-76 also contains additional tools that will make it easier for Elections Canada and the Canada Elections Commissioner to prevent or limit the effects of third-party influence on Canadian voters. For example, a new third-party funding section of the Act will prohibit the use of foreign funds at any time to obtain or broadcast partisan advertising, to fund partisan activities, or to conduct polls. New anti-avoidance provisions will also forbid all attempts to sidestep these rules. Le projet de loi C-76
Bill 76 includes a new offense to prevent the fraudulent use of a computer in order to affect election results. The new offense was added during committee study, and it now forbids any attempt to affect an election, and this offense will reinforce this prohibition.
To publish material made by anyone attempting to impersonate the Chief Electoral Officer, or a returning officer. Finally, on the recommendation of the Commissioner of Canada Elections, our government has reinforced a ban that applies to all persons and entities who sell advertising space. It will now be forbidden to sell advertising space to foreigners that would allow them to broadcast election advertising. The results of Canadian elections should only ever be determined by electoral votes made by Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-76 already contained numerous amendments to the Act to amend the Canada Elections Act that were important to Elections Canada's recommendations. Durant l'étude menée par le comité,
During the study led by committee, the Government of Canada heard from independent experts whose only role is to protect our democratic institutions. I am proud of the comments made by these experts because they have helped make this bill even stronger.
of the comments these experts have made because they have helped made this bill even stronger. Therefore, I invite all colleagues in the House today to voice their support of the third reading of the Act to amend the Canada Elections Act and modernize our electoral process and make it more transparent, accessible, and secure for all Canadians. 56. When we talk about the number of hours of C-76 at committee, 24 hours of committee time, the hours of study of CEO recommendations by committee, 36.5 hours, the hours of study of C-23 for the Fair Elections Act, 49.5. I can tell you, Madam Speaker, this is a bill that will encourage Canadians to participate fully in the electoral process, and that is exactly what we intended. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for his discussion. I have only one concern from all of the debate and information I've received about C-76, and that is this. We saw multiple examples where people that were the asylum seekers that were coming in received letters saying that they should register to vote. And I'm concerned to understand what mechanisms will be in place, either with Elections Canada, to actually verify, because my understanding is they're not Canadian citizens, they shouldn't be able to vote, and if we go with a voter ID card only, then how will we make sure that we don't have illegal voting? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
Well, Madam Speaker, I thank you and I thank the honourable member for her concern about the safety and security of the Canadian electoral system, and it's quite clear. Permanent residents and landed immigrants don't get to vote. Canadian citizens get to vote. Voter ID cards are exactly that, demonstrating that you are a person who is a Canadian citizen. That is what we want to make sure takes place in this country, and that is what C-76 ensures.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for North Island Powell River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his impassioned speech. One of the things that really concerns me in this House is the reality that we've had time allocation again put on this. This is the second time that's happened, and we're actually talking about our elections and how they work, and I think it's really important that we have that meaningful debate. So I appreciate the work that's been done. I appreciate the work that's been done in committee, but to time allocate on this particular bill is absolutely shameful, and I would just like to hear the member's response to that comment.
Here, here. The honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
I think we've had Madam Speaker, thank you to you and to the honourable colleague for her concern. I think the amount of work the committee has done on this particular bill is exemplary. We've had great debate here in this House. If you take a look at the amount of time that was spent on C-23, it's a fraction of what we've been able to spend on C-76. And I think it's important to let members of this House know that a voter identification card is information. That information is important. Only Canadian citizens can vote in a Canadian election, and that is the way it should be.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Whitby. For Whitby?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his speech. And, you know, the amendments made by committee and throughout this process has really allowed for persons with disabilities to have more access to be able to vote. And we know that our democracy is only improved when we allow access, and as my colleague just mentioned, to Canadian citizens who are allowed to vote, who have the proper voter information, and who could subsequently provide either their own identification cards or have someone with the proper documents vouch for them. So the amount of amendments made to ensure that persons with disabilities are able to vote, I find is really impressive because it allows for more inclusive. I wonder if you could speak to other measures within this piece of legislation that allows for a more inclusive part of Canadians to play in our democracy.
The member for Edmonton Centre.
Well, Madam Speaker, thank you very much to my honourable colleague from Whitby, and I think I would like to spend a moment reinforcing what she's talking about, the great work of the committee and of the government on C-76 as it pertains to making sure that Canadian elections are inclusive, barrier-free. I mean, if you take a look at our government approach as a whole when it pertains to persons with disability, we are trying to make the federal workplace barrier-free through C-81. We're trying to make sure that our elections process is inclusive and fair, and I think one of the things that we can say is that this is a process that should be inclusive to all Canadians, and that should prevent foreign interference in our Canadian election system, and that is exactly what C-76 does.
Time for a brief question. The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I still do not understand when it comes to making sure that people that shouldn't be allowed to vote are voting. Why then is Elections Canada sending notices to asylum seekers that do not have Canadian citizenship, telling them to register to vote? Who's doing the verification that they're Canadian citizens?
The honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the almost temporary upgrade to my status here in the House. But to my honourable colleague across the way, let's be really clear. The voter information card is a proof of address. It's not a proof of identity. You need to show proof of identity. You need to show that you're a Canadian citizen. That is what it takes to vote in the Canadian election. Everything else is frivolous and vexatious attacks on the Canadian system, electoral system from the other side.
Reprise de débat, resuming debate. The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much. And it was interesting to listen to my colleague across because, I'm looking at this and I was going to start my speech off talking about foreign financing, but when we're talking about voter identification, we recognize that there's 39 pieces of identification that were approved under the Fair Elections Act. And we have to talk about these because we just got through an municipal election here in Ontario just a few days ago in which we heard about voters' cards being left in the lobby of apartment buildings where people did not have them actually secured into their mailboxes. Now, of course, that had a bit of a threat as well because with that, there was issues with the fact that it had a PIN number and somebody could go online. We recognize that most Canadians are not going to do things that are fraudulent, but there are those who, in times where they are so passionate, they may choose to do something that sometimes is illegal, basically to better their cause or to do something that they think is really, really important. So it was great to hear my colleague from Sarnia-Lambton question, what are we going to do about voter identification cards? If we can go with a voter ID card that we've received in the mail and then show that with our Costco card, is that actually proving that we're Canadian? And for many years, I worked as a campaign manager and worked in an office talking to different people about what they needed. I worked in a constituency office where, I'm working with Canadians who are applying for Canada Child Benefit, they're applying for Canadian citizenship, they're applying for all of these things. And it's peculiar how our departments and everything like that, you need some sort of identification. You need to prove who you are. You need to prove where you live to receive Ontario Disability, to receive Ontario Works, to receive a variety of different programs. But the biggest thing for a Canadian citizen that they can do is vote. Yet somehow we don't say that you need those documents. So after listening to my friend from Edmonton, I'm really concerned where they think that proving Canadian citizenship is just going to be that easy by saying a person comes in with their driver's license, their voter's card. I'm just a reminder. Permanent residents can drive too. I see them drive all the time. So I think that's one thing we have to really look at. But I really do want to focus more on the fact that when we talk about foreign financing, this is where I want to go with this because I think that we saw in the last election in 2015 the number of third-party campaigns. I saw that not only at the provincial election, the federal election, and also in the municipal election recently as well. But when we see, I can't turn on the TV where I can see authorized by, the campaign manager for X. A lot of times it's authorized by a campaign that is a third party. And for many of the people, like myself, my contributions to run my personal campaign came from individuals. There were, I believe, 241 approximately individuals who donated to the EDA during that period of time, during my window of during the window of the 2015 elections. Those were all individuals. We did not accept, we didn't have any third parties working around us. We were actually on the ground working. Yet some of my colleagues who were in ridings such as London North Centre, we know that there were huge campaigns going on that were really focusing on anything but Harper. And those are the concerns that I have, because this isn't money coming to the Liberal Party. It's not money coming to the NDP Party or the Green Party. It is money that is being used that people are actually going out there and campaigning on. And so I kind of started looking at my returns for the 2015 election to see how much money I had fundraised compared to my colleagues. And I'm talking about a $40,000 and $50,000 difference in fundraising that I had towards them. Yet they ran very strong campaigns as well. But where did they get their money from? Where did they get their advertising from? They didn't necessarily have to go out there and do that. They didn't actually necessarily have to pay for it from their campaign, because we know how many third parties were out there doing that. Now, this is where it goes into the next step, is where is that money coming from that is giving these campaigns, these third parties, money? And that's where I would like to continue with the conversation that the member from Thornhill had. We talk about things like the Tides Foundation. Located in San Francisco and New York, the Tides Foundation funneled money through Canadian groups, Canadian charitable organizations, that then put that money into Canadian elections. It's really that simple. It's so easy to look at the fact that money from the United States was filtered into a Canadian campaign through a third party. And we have to recognize that what are some of those restrictions and regulations? Now, it's great because within the Senate, Senator Frum has put forward, was talking about some of these contributions, and there was a lot of discussion on that, about contributions coming from third parties, and how the fact that you could donate to a party, and let's say we have to look at this all hypothetically, because this entire conversation is really hypothetical. What if? And that's what we really need to sit here. When we're talking about the Government of Canada, it should be pretty black and white when it comes to your rights to vote and your rights to give into a party. And so what happens if somebody donates $10,000 to a foundation 6 months prior, and this is a not-for-profit, they donate 6 months prior, then that money goes into a campaign. It doesn't matter. We could have, what we've done in this legislation bill, C-76, is we've increased the amount that they can spend. So we're going to have groups, and it's not that I'm saying that the Conservatives were the only groups that we're beaten up on. I recognize that all of us have third parties that do support us, and that's fine. But don't tell me that 101 reasons to vote against Harper, as well as the other one that I really appreciated was, I got to just find it here for a moment. It was called Voters Against Harper. Those are two organizations. I can tell you that the money that was funneled through those parties were not supporting Conservative candidates. But instead, there was now a new war chest for either that NDP candidate, the Green candidate, or the Liberal candidate, or perhaps a Bloc candidate. We have to recognize that we are now, and it's not just us as individuals, but we are now fighting another source. We're not fighting amongst political parties. We have activists out there that are doing this. And so the foreign funding is a critical piece. When we talk about when we talk about the organization that Tides is involved with, the Dogwood Initiative, that is a really interesting case, because I want to read just a little bit about the Dogwood Initiative. It's a Canadian not-for-profit public interest group based in Victoria, BC. Their organization works to increase the power of British Columbians over government decision-making. They were instrumental in the fight against Enbridge's Northern Gateway pipeline, introducing a tanker moratorium on BC's north coast, and the province's campaign finance reform. The organization currently works to stop Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain tanker and pipeline expansion in BC, ban U.S. thermal coal exports through BC ports, and restore accountability and transparency to the province's democracy by calling it the corruption inquiry. Now, the thing is, researchers and pundits have come back, and it's been criticized because Dogwood has been funded from outside of Canada. So there is foreign investment coming in. The U.S.-based funders provided money through the Tides Foundation to Dogwood, and then now we have these groups as working as a third party. So if I'm allowed to spend $78,000 on my campaign, my colleague is allowed to spend $78,000 on her campaign or his campaign, and they actually have a third party. Now they're talking about spending $156,000 on their campaign if they really invest properly in some of these things. Because it's not just about one group. we have to recognize in the last federal election, there was 115 organizations that were third party. So if you take in this, and this is all hypothetical, and this is why we need to have this debate, this is why we need to have this discussion. We get one group, or we get one person that decides, I don't like what they're doing. We're going to set up 100 different organizations. We're going to put $10,000 into each organization, and now that money can be filtered. Yes, there is a cap on how much money they can spend within a certain constituency, but at the same time, if you're doing that 100 times over, that is unfair. And this is where I'm looking at this saying this is absolutely not the right thing to do. We have to be very, very cautious on foreign investment coming into Canada that is focusing on the policies of Canadian politicians. We hear about fake news all the time, and I don't want to get invested into what's happened in the United States, but I don't think we should kid ourselves. There are people here in Canada that also have an agenda that are speaking to our government officials. I mean, this week we've talked so much about Rear Admiral Norman and the fact that the lobbyists that were working for Irving and how Davies Shipyard lost something, and all of these things. Please don't kid ourselves. Lobbyists and third-party groups are very, very important in Canadian government. And now when they're part of our elections as well, we have to have caution on that. So it's a really big concern. I'm just going to go back to a quote that I have, and this came from an editorial that was written by our former colleague, the Honourable Joe Oliver, who was the Minister of Finance, who was a fantastic Minister of Finance and worked Canada, continued the great job that Jim Flaherty did. And this is something that I think most Canadians need to understand, and we have to bring this back to the table, to the dining table, so that everybody understands it. Canadians can only donate $1,550 to political parties and candidates. Union and corporate donations have been banned completely, and yet in the Senate hearing, Commissioner Cote said that as long as foreign money is donated to a third party 6 months prior to the election being dropped, the amount that can be donated is endless. These are things that we have to be aware of, and I thank everybody for listening. Let's have this conversation, really talk about what's happening in Canadian elections.
Good job. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Whitby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for her speech. And I want to just go back to the beginning of her speech because I want to make some very clear distinctions around the voter information card. And to be clear to anybody who's listening or anybody who had inadvertently received a card from Elections Canada, that the voter information card is not a piece of ID, and that it is an offence under the Canada Elections Act for a non-citizen to vote or for a non-citizen to register to vote when they know they're not able to do so. So that is, I think, something that I know that we're talking about it in the context of the cards being sent out, but we should be telling individuals that that is an offence and it's something that they cannot do under Canadian law. And I'd hope that in this conversation that becomes clear to all permanent residents and non-Canadian citizens that is not something that they can do.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Well, thank you very much. And as I was doing my research for this speech, I was looking at information regarding the Surrey, BC, the election that was going on there, where we see that there was a concern with voter fraud, where people who are non-Canadians that were voting in municipal elections. We recognize as Canadians that is our right to vote, but we also have to recognize that everybody in Canada is not always honourable. It may be 1%, it may be 0.5%, but it does matter. Canadians have the privilege to vote because we are Canadians, and that is what it is. Just on that list, first of all, I would like to share with the member that what she's advised is incorrect. It can be used as one piece of ID. So if we're looking at the voter card as being used as one piece of ID, indicating where your address is, we now then can use a Canadian health card or an Ontario health card. That does not prove that you're a Canadian citizen. Here's another, a social insurance number. Well, only a few of us know that number 9 means that you're not a citizen of Canada. There's lots of information, and so unfortunately I cannot agree with that.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Desnethé, Mississippi, Churchill River.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. I'd like to voice some of my comments and some concerns regarding this very important discussion that we're having here this morning. For both the Liberal Party, the Liberal government, as well as the Conservative government, there's the level of hypocrisy going on when they speak about Canadians. All Canadians are equal. where I come from within Dason at the Mississippi Churchill River riding, even obtaining a voter ID is a challenge. So both parties are making it difficult for Indigenous voters and people who are disenfranchised, who are struggling, making it difficult to come and vote. How can they improve that for all Canadians?
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, and I'd really like to thank my neighbour and NDP colleague for that question. We recognize there are challenges when we talk about the poverty reduction strategy, when we talk about all of those things. One of the greatest challenges for our persons is actually getting identification, whether it's a health card, things of that. That is where the Canadian government needs to work. That's where the provincial governments and territorial governments need to make sure that people have those, because all people should be able to have a health card. If they have the right to health in Canada, they should be able to have that health card. So we do need to work with our First Nations, and I totally appreciate that comment, and let's work harder to do more. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Democratic Institution.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Every entity, every individual who isn't a candidate, an EDA, or a political party is a third party. So I guess I'd like the member opposite to tell me, does she really think that it's her position that any individual who wants to engage in topics that matter to them should have to register and report to the government?
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Well, that's a really unique question, but I think that at the end of the day, they can give to a not-for-profit. They can give things like that. We have to be very, very cautious when we're talking about interest groups outside of this country funneling their money into Canada so that they can do things like stop our pipelines so that they can build pipelines within their own country and extract oil from their own countries. We have to be aware of these. I think if you're not giving into a political campaign, if you're not giving into an EDA, you're more than likely giving to a church, to a not-for-profit, for some of these organizations. But I think a lot of times we have to be cautious on what these organizations are doing when it comes to political duties.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for the honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage and Multiculturalism.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm glad to speak this morning on support of Bill C-76. The goal of Bill C-76, the Elections Modernization Act, is to modernize Canada's electoral system and to strengthen its integrity by making it more transparent, accessible, and secure. It does so, among other things, by establishing spending limits for third parties and political parties during a pre-writ period, by increasing transparency regarding the participation of third parties in the electoral process, and by expanding the powers of the Commissioner of Canada Elections. The Commissioner's new powers will include the imposition of administrative monetary penalties for contraventions to key parts of the Act, including those governing political financing and third-party activities. In recent weeks and months, we've seen a great deal of news about the influence of foreigners, fake news, and the impact of emerging technologies on elections around the world. The Government of Canada has already included Bill C-76 right upon its introduction in this spring, a number of measures aimed at preventing foreign influence or the malicious use of technology. However, Madam Speaker, new details about undue influence attempts in Western democracies' electoral systems are brought to the public's attention almost weekly. Of course, amendments to the Canada Elections Act only represent one tool at our country's disposal in its fight to protect our democracy. Members of Parliament, political actors, academics, and Canada's civil society at large also have important roles to play, for example, in the area of civic literacy. But I would like to focus my remarks today on the improvements brought to the Elections Modernization Act during its study in committee, which the Government of Canada sees as a great tool aimed at increasing transparency of political advertising practices. In 2017, Statistics Canada was estimating that almost every Canadian under the age of 45 years of age was using the Internet virtually every day, while approximately 80% of Canadians aged 45 to 65 were using the Internet every day. As of April 1st, 2018, Statistics Canada estimates Canada's population at just above 37 million. This means that roughly 22 to 23 million Canadians between the ages of 18 to 65 access the Internet and online platforms virtually daily. Given the impact of new technologies on Canada's lives, the time has come to require more transparency from online platforms during election periods. Online platforms, whether they're smartphones, applications, or websites which sell advertising space on commercial basis during the pre-writ and election periods will now be legally compelled to maintain an online registry of all partisan and election advertising messages that they publish. This new requirement will apply to those online platforms having a medium to high reach to persons present in Canada, no matter where the platform is actually located. Each online platform will be required to maintain this registry on the platform itself and to make it fully accessible to the public. The registry will include at least a copy of each partisan election advertising message that have been published during the pre-writ and the election period, respectively, as well as information about the person or entity who authorized the publication of the message. Traditional media such as radio, television, and newspapers offered political ads to Canadians in plain view. They allowed all political actors to be held accountable for the information they share and for the promises they made. In comparison, online platforms allow advertisers to target a very precise segment of the population. Without a registry of political ads, it is impossible for Canadians to know how their neighbors, their families, and their co-workers might be targeted. Bill C-76 says new online platform registry of political ads will help Canadians better understand who is trying to influence them and how. For example, if an election advertising message was targeted to only 50 Canadian electors, a copy of the published advertising would need to be published in that registry. Along with the copy would be found the name of the financial agent who authorized its publication, whether it was the official agent of a candidate or chief agent of a registered party, or one of his or her delegates, or the financial agent of a third party. The Canada Elections Act will require online platforms to maintain public access to the new registry for a minimum period of 2 years after the polling date. This will ensure more transparency on political advertising targeting techniques, as Canadians, including academic researchers and journalists, will be able to take a close look at all messages conveyed by political entities and third parties in their attempts to influence Canadians. In addition, online platforms will be required to safeguard the information found in the registry for a total of 5 years after the polling date. Again, this retention requirement will ensure that the Commissioner of Canada Elections will have sufficient time to initiate investigations and, when necessary, seek access to the contents of the registry. Of course, political entities and third parties will be legally required to cooperate with online platforms by providing them with the information they need in order to publish them on the registry. Political entities, third parties, and online platforms would fail to comply with the new Canada Elections Act requirements could potentially face criminal charges. The Government of Canada recognizes that some online platforms have already announced voluntary transparency measures of the kind I'm talking to you about today. Madam Speaker, this is a helpful development, but on a subject matter as important as Canada's democracy, voluntary measures are not always sufficient anymore. The new Canada Elections Act requirements will ensure that all qualifying online platforms will be subject to the same disclosure rules, and the same minimum information will be made available in each online platform's registry of political ads. These new requirements, along with the bans on use of foreign funding and on selling of advertising space to foreigners, as well as new financial returns required of third parties during the election period, will go a great way into affording Canadians with a more secure and transparent electoral system. I strongly encourage all members of this House across party lines to support Bill C-76, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his comments. Madam Speaker, there's no more sacred obligation than to ensure that our citizens have the opportunity to vote privately in a democratic election and to make sure that their identity is who they say they are. But, Madam Speaker, this government is implying that the voter information cards, which are mailed out to Canadians, are identification cards. And we know clearly they're not, Madam Speaker, because in the last election, nearly 1 million of those cards were issued in error. So, Madam Speaker, my question to my colleague is, how can he have confidence in this system which mails out the information cards, many of which are in error, first of all, and secondly, many of them which fall into hands of unscrupulous people when they're thrown into the recycle bin at apartment buildings and townhouses. It's an issue, Madam Speaker, that I think is very important to many people in my riding, and I'm sure my colleague has heard from constituents in his riding about the concerns they have about using the voter information cards as a voter ID card. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the comments from my friend opposite. I agree with my friend that the right to vote of Canadians is sacrosanct. It is a right that is available to every single Canadian citizen, and I know but when we go and vote, we reiterate our citizenship commitment to this country. But one thing that I want to clarify is that it's a voter information card that is mailed out. That is not really the only form of it's in fact not an ID. That needs to be coupled with proper identification that verifies who the individual is. The Elections Act pretty much it's illegal for anyone to vote who's not eligible to vote, and I'm confident that this Act, Bill C-76, ensures that all citizens who want to vote are able to vote, and we can't, while fraud may be an issue in one or two instances, we can't make public policy based on those very very minor infractions that can be enforced through our Elections Act.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre. Edmonton West, sorry.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. One of the issues we've seen out of the U.S. Treasury Department has found evidence that Russian oil oligarchs have been funding Tides USA. Tides USA is known to actually then refunnel money into Canada to interrupt our oil business up here, but also influence elections. C-76 actually allows a doubling of foreign money to be used. I'm asking the member why the Liberal Party would allow such an issue when we've seen pure evidence that Russian money is being funneled through Tides USA into Tides Canada to influence our elections.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions. No. Sorry, that's me. Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage and Multiculturalism. There's a few of them.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Bill C-76 essentially puts severe limitations on third-party advertising. There's a very well-grounded regime to ensure that there's transparency in who those parties are, and I believe the Bill C-76 strengthens our democracy from foreign influence. And while the C-76 imposes certain restrictions on third parties and influence of foreigners, there are other important mechanisms the government will undertake to ensure that there's security in the internet to make sure that foreign influence is curtailed. It's certainly a problem in parts of the world and in Canada as well, and I believe Bill C-76 is a very important step in addressing this issue.
Resume debate. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm always honoured to rise in this House. I'd like to say hello to all of the residents of Beauport-Limoilou who are listening on Facebook, Twitter, or CPAC. And I'd like to answer straight away to a comment that was made by the other member. Now, they had said, our objective is to reduce the impact of third parties that may be abroad, that may be interfering. Now, one of the things that concerns me the most with this bill is that they're going to, obviously the bill is going to pass because they have a majority, so this is going to mean that there will be more than 1 million Canadians living outside of Canada who have been doing so for more than 5 years, who will now be able to vote in elections, even if they've been abroad for 5, 10, 15 years. So imagine, now it's a privilege for any Canadian who lives in Canada, who's never left, to vote, and now these people will be able to choose a riding at random to vote in. So this is a very disproportionate privilege that we're giving them. I lived in the States for a number of years, and I could, or if I lived in the United States, I could say, well, you know, I know there's this riding that's a swing riding, and I can vote Liberal to make sure that the Liberal gets in there. So it's a very dangerous measure. And it will give power. Now, I don't want to say it will give power to foreigners, because we are talking about Canadians, but Canadians who live abroad and have been doing so for a long time. Now, Madam Speaker, for those who are listening, we're talking about Bill C-76, which aims to modernize the Canada Elections Act. It's a very important issue because it is the Elections Act that sets the yardsticks and the parameters for our elections, and which helps determine who will form the next government of Canada. Now, I'm sure that my constituents in Beauport-Limoilou will have a hard time believing the Liberal government when they say they want to improve democracy and improve our democratic system and allow more people to vote. Because the Liberals, as we know, have a sad history that we've seen over the years when it comes to democracy. A couple of years ago, I was right at the heart of this debate in the House because I was sitting on the Government Operations Committee. The Liberals put forward a parliamentary reform, which included some fairly surprising measures. They were trying to reduce the opposition's power, so really reduce the power of up to 10 million Canadians to vote for the party they wanted, including any party in this House. Not only did they want to reduce speaking time in the House, which is ridiculous, Madam Speaker, because I've said this many times, we only have the right to speak 20 minutes. Every member here only has 20 minutes to speak on an issue. And the Liberals wanted to reduce that speaking time from 20 to 10 minutes. So the 20 minutes wouldn't even exist anymore. Now, there's a book that I really like, Madam Speaker. It's called The Debates of Confederation. Whether we're talking about Papineau, Doyon, Georges-Étienne Cartier, or Johnny MacDonald, La Fontaine, there were members in this House who would speak for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time, sometimes all night. And the government wanted to reduce our speaking time to 10 minutes. I mean, imagine that. All that to prevent the opposition from expressing themselves. And imagine what they did yesterday. It's even worse. This really shows their attitude toward parliamentary democracy. They placed time allocation, a gag, as we often say in Quebec, a gag order on a debate that had to do with modernizing the Elections Act in Canada. I don't think there's any more startling example of their intentions than that. They're really trying to ram through their bill. So it's a real shame. They're trying to ram it down our throats. And what they did in 2015, 2016 with their cash for access scandal is that when a big lobbyist wanted to meet a minister or the prime minister to talk about a particular issue, they could simply sign up for an event, pay $1,500. It's a little more today, but they could meet with ministers that way. And we're not talking about small riding events. We're talking about exclusive cocktail parties to allow big lobbyists to influence political decisions. I'll give you a significant example. The Minister of Finance had met with port authorities from the Port of Halifax who were very interested in that particular issue. So it was a 5 à 7 with people who were interested in that particular issue. And that's a really flagrant example of a conflict of interest and of cash for access. Another example that shows how it's hard for the public to trust Liberals when they say they want to broaden voting rights and expand democratic participation. I mean, just look at all of the promises that they've broken since 2015. Now, in an election, you have a platform, and each party presents a platform including commitments and promises. I prefer the term commitments myself, but they often say promises. They said we're going to run a small deficit of $10 billion for just the first couple of years. Then we'll continue to bring it down. And year after year, because yes, we are into the third year of their mandate now, they ran $30 billion, $20 billion, and $19 billion in deficit. So they broke that promise. And even worse, Madam Speaker, they broke their promise to balance the budget. As my colleague for Louis Saint Laurent has said many times in this place, this is the first time in history that we've seen structural deficits when we aren't in a significant recession or at war. And worse, this is the first time we've seen a government that doesn't even have a date set to balance the budget. It doesn't make any sense. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, which is a position created by the Right Honourable Stephen Harper, recently said that it's hard to see a government that doesn't take state affairs more seriously. Now, infrastructure. They said that they had the biggest infrastructure program in the history of Canada. Of course, they always say it's historic. Billions of dollars. Now, I wonder how much of that they've actually disbursed so far. Only a small portion for projects here and there. It was supposed to be a pan-Canada project, a large-scale project, but it didn't materialize. Another broken promise, and I really didn't agree with this promise in the first place, but they promised, and probably a lot of people voted for them because they said that they would change the voting system to make it, well, proportional, although I think what they really wanted, what do you call it? They wanted a preferential ranked ballot because, according to experts, they're liberal experts, that would give them an advantage. So just broken promise after broken promise. And this one in particular, this has to do with elections, with the way that Canadians choose their government. They reneged on this fundamental promise to change the voting system. And this is another blatant example that shows that Canadians can't trust them to reform democracy. Now, let's get back to the matter at hand, Bill C-76. It aims to make two major changes, which, in my opinion, are really deplorable. First of all, it would allow the Chief Electoral Officer to allow voting cards as a piece of identity. Now, Madam Speaker, as my colleague recently said, my Conservative colleague recently said, voting cards can end up pretty much anywhere, in recycling boxes, sticking out of mailboxes and community mailboxes. So there are all sorts of ways that a citizen might show up with a voting card. It really is fairly easy. And show up at the voting booth. And according to this Liberal bill, that person could vote. When there's no way of knowing whether that is really the person whose name is on the card. Madam Speaker, when I go to the hospital, now fortunately I don't have to very often, but when I do, not only do I have to present my doctor's referral or prescription, but I also have to present ID, and I have to present my hospital card. I'll continue after question period. Thank you for the speech. The Honourable Member will have 5 minutes remaining for questions and comments when debate will resume after question period.
By members, déclaration de député. L'honorable député de Ville-Marie, le Sud-Ouest, Île-des-Sœurs.
Madam Speaker, thousands of Indigenous people fought in the War of 1812, including on this day, October 26, 1813. 205 years ago at the Battle of Chateauguay, Mohawk warriors from Kahnawake and Kanesatake fighting a common foe, Ranatagarias, the destroyer of towns who had destroyed their people's villages some 30 years earlier. The Battle of Chateauguay is remembered alongside the Battle of Chrysler's Farm that caused American forces to give up their attack on Montreal and abandon the St. Lawrence campaign. On this day, a British force of slightly over 1,500 troops, composed mostly of French-Canadian fighters and commanded by Charles de Salaberry, repelled an American fighting offensive twice its size. Today, 6 regiments of the Canadian Armed Forces carry battle honours from the conflict, le Royal 22e Régiment, the Canadian Grenadier Guards, up the Guards, the Black Watch, les Voltigeurs de Québec, les Fusiliers de Saint-Laurent et le Régiment de la Chaudière. Madame la Présidente, l'histoire de notre...
Madam Speaker, the history of our country is both rich and complex. But let us remember that on this day, 205 years ago, the founding peoples of this country united to fight a common enemy and set the foundation.
Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, in this government's last budget, it was noted with some concern that the discount on Alberta crude had averaged $20 a barrel over the previous year. The budget then went on to predict that with new pipelines on the way, the differential this year would begin to close, allowing Canadians to get closer to world prices. Well, Mr. Speaker, the differential has not shrunk. Last week, it hit a staggering $50 per barrel. This means that under this government's failed pipeline policies, Canada is subsidizing the American economy by sending discount oil along with jobs, investment, and lost tax revenue to the United States while supporting Saudi Arabia by importing its oil. So on behalf of thousands of my constituents that depend directly on the energy industry, I call upon this government to stop Bill C-69, stop C-48, quit dithering, table a plan to get Trans Mountain built, scrap the carbon tax, and get serious about energy policy.
The honourable member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Congratulations, 2018 Windsor-Essex Sports Hall of Fame inductees. Athletes Cheryl Damphouse, golf, Andy Delmore, hockey, Richard Shaw, basketball, and Mary Spencer, boxing. And to sports builders, J. Paul Redham, thoroughbred racing, Don Marin, wrestling coach, Dominic Silvaggio, basketball coach, and Paul Carter, basketball officiating. Tecumseh Baseball Club for 75 years, and the 2011 to 2015 University of Windsor women's basketball team, winning 5 straight championships. Since 1981, the Windsor-Essex Sports Hall of Fame has been showcasing and archiving our illustrious sporting achievements. I salute this year's board, headed by Dr. Scott Martin, Chuck Smith, Charlotte Loring, Anthony Panaccia, Craig Greenham, and Carrie Vignew. Now, let's all get behind the Faro Riverside Miracle Park and continue to remove the barriers to participation in sport.
L'honorable député d'Argenteuil, La Petite Nation.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. During the 20th edition of the Mercadar Awards, organized by Laurentides International in Mirabel, a company in my riding won top honors in the Innovative Exporter category. LP Adventure, located in Brownsburg-Chatham, manufactures and sells parts for Subaru. This company stands out in particular due to its international development project. I would like to congratulate the president of LP Adventure, Julien Pilon, as well as the members of his team, for having won this prestigious award. I'm proud of the success of this company in Argenteuil, La Petite Nation, whose know-how, innovation, and passion led them to become a real North American leader in the manufacturing of parts for Subaru sports vehicles. Congratulations to the entire team.
Honourable member for Malpeque.
Madam Speaker, today I have the honour to rise and congratulate Ukrainian interns working on the Hill here as part of the Canada-Ukraine parliamentary program, whose time in Parliament is rapidly coming to an end. Established in 1991, this program over time has brought almost 1,000 young Ukrainians to Canada to learn about our system of government, our history, and our people. A number of parliamentarians from all parties had the privilege of working with these talented young men and women who we sincerely thank them and hope that their time here on the Hill that they have learned from us as we have learned from them. This is the 5th time I have hosted an intern, and I can attest to the fact that it is an excellent cultural and educational exchange between Canada and Ukraine, as well as an opportunity to deepen our national ties. I'd like to thank my intern, Yaroslav, and wish all of them well in the future.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Madam Speaker, last Friday I participated in the Bridges of Hope project when it launched at Hartman Bridge in New Hamburg. Bridges of Hope is an initiative launched locally by two inspirational Grade 12 students from my riding, Greta Dotzert and Olivia Miller. Their mission is simple: to break the stigma surrounding mental illness by attaching uplifting and positive messages to 3 frequently traveled pedestrian bridges in Waterloo region. Messages like, your life matters, you are not alone, and tomorrow needs you. Madam Speaker, I've quoted often in this House, hope is the oxygen of the human spirit. Without it, the spirit dies. Hope is foundational to mental health recovery, and it's contagious. We each have it within us to share with our neighbor. Greta and Olivia, your compassion and your desire to help others are an example to all of us. Your message of hope will impact the lives of many in our community, especially those who need encouragement the most. You are not alone. Reach out, embrace hope. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Le député de Saint-Jean.
Madame la Présidente, dernièrement,
Madam Speaker, recently, 2 community solidarity events were organized in the riding of Saint-Jean. I would like to congratulate Lise Boulanger, who mobilized volunteers during the World Day for the Refusal of Misery to serve meals to citizens in need. I would also like to highlight the involvement of the Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu Homelessness Roundtable, which, in cooperation with many other local groups, presented for the very first time in our community a homelessness awareness night. This raising of awareness led to the rediscovery of the importance of the work that is done by the Roundtable. Along with Action Dépendance, they're working on a project whose goal is to offer services to people who are facing homelessness. Madam Speaker, it is with great respect that I applaud the volunteers and stakeholders who get involved and who make our country a better place.
A member for Oakville.
Madam Speaker, after visiting the Lions Foundation of Canada dog guides in my riding of Oakville, I can truly say that dogs are people's best friend. Madam Speaker, when people think dog guides, they usually think of a dog providing assistance to someone with visual impairment. But these dogs are trained to do much more. Dog guides assist people with hearing impairments, provide seizure response, detect changes in blood sugar for people with diabetes, support children on the autism spectrum, and help the physically disabled. A dog guide increases confidence and mobility of those that are affected by impairments and provide a strong sense of safety and companionship. Many people in my riding foster puppies before they're ready for training, and they are always looking for loving families to adopt a dog when they retire from duty. So if you're looking for a 4-legged hero, look no further than a dog guide of Oakville. Madam Speaker, I am so proud to share the incredible work of the Lions Foundation of Canada Dog Guides. I can't wait to visit again. Thank you.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I am proud to rise in support of Children's Vision Month, which takes place annually every October. I would like to thank the Canadian Association of Optometrists who took the time to meet me on this topic and share important information. When children reach 6 months of age, vision is the most dominant of the senses and forms the basis of cognitive and social development. Despite this fact, a majority of parents are unaware of the importance of vision on overall health. Uncorrected vision problems interfere with learning, reading, and concentrating in school, which impacts all aspects of growth and development. Since nearly a quarter of Canadian children have some form of diagnosable vision problem, it is important to recognize the significance of Children's Vision Month and act on it for the benefit of our children and their futures. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Longueuil, Charles Lemoine.
Madam Speaker, during Small Business Week, I had the chance to attend a roundtable with entrepreneurs and winners of the 2018 WISE 50 Over 50 Awards. Les lauréats sont des
The winners are bold and innovative Canadian entrepreneurs who started their businesses after turning 50 and who did whatever was necessary to launch the business of their dreams. Throughout this animated conversation, I learned about the particular challenges met by these extraordinary men and women.
Thinks of entrepreneurs, we often envision young people. What we fail to see, Madam Speaker, is the incredible talent and expertise of our senior entrepreneurs. These entrepreneurs are forces to be reckoned with in the world of business. I salute all seniorpreneurs who are creating jobs, following their passion and proving that entrepreneurship certainly knows no age. Ils sont une véritable source.
They are a real source of inspiration for every generation. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kitchener South Hespeler.
One of the most historic and picturesque parts of the riding is the village of Hespeler, which was first settled in 1798. It is home to over 70 independent family-operated shops, restaurants, and services where our community gathers. Nestled beside the Speed River, the traditional old downtown benefits from the stewardship of the Hespeler Business Improvement Area Association, which oversees the beautification and preservation of the historic and traditional character of our village on the river. The BIA is a non-profit organization with a membership of over 50 businesses and property owners who fund the association and volunteer their time. This year, the BIA supported more than 20 community events. Two highlights were the lighting of the falls at St. Jacob's Landing and the annual spring Easter egg hunt. Thank you to the members of the Hespeler BIA for their great work and the great work they do for our community.
The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Madam Speaker, Albertans are struggling, Edmontonians are struggling. And what do we get from the Ottawa Liberals in our time of need? A carbon tax. Now, their response to concerns voiced about this carbon tax on everything, take the kids to morning hockey on a bus, renovate your house, maybe buy an electric car. Now, that's easy enough to say if you're a trust fund millionaire. But people in my riding are already feeling the hit from the Liberal failure on pipelines and their attack on our energy industry with Bill C-69 and the tanker ban. Now, on top of all of that, they're being forced to pay for a carbon tax on everything. The Liberals preach about the middle-class tax cut, but that tiny amount means nothing when the cost of everything else, including interest rates and debt, is skyrocketing thanks to this government. It's time for this government to start thinking about their individual impacts of the policies are having on everyday Canadians, rather than pandering to special interest groups. It's time for this government to listen to Albertans and axe this carbon tax.
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Giselle Portenier is an award-winning filmmaker. Her documentary, In the Name of Your Daughter, was chosen to be shown at the World Parliamentary Conference in Ottawa last week. In the Name of Your Daughter is about the most courageous girls in the world, the children in Tanzania who risked their lives to defy their parents and the thousands-year-old custom of female genital mutilation. Although female genital mutilation is illegal in Tanzania, old customs die hard. Fathers and families believe that this form of torture reduces promiscuity, and they know that mutilated girls command twice the bride price in cows. This documentary introduces us to the chillingly named cutting season, when young African girls know that they are about to be cut, and to Rabah Samueli, who protects these girls at her safe house. In Maria's case, her grandmother ordered her to pack a bag and go to her father's village for a mutilation ceremony. Instead, Maria ran away from home and straight to the safe house. I wish I could save other girls from FGM, the young girl says, tears streaming down her face. Maria is 8. Thank you.
The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Madam Speaker, last Saturday, British Columbians voted in municipal elections. Hundreds of citizens in South Okanagan, West Kootenay were candidates for mayors, councillors, school board trustees, and regional district directors. Some succeeded and some did not, but I want to congratulate all of them for offering to serve. Municipal politics is one of the most important but most thankless tasks in the country, and I'd like to highlight the careers of two citizens who chose to retire this year and let others carry the torch. One is Tom Siddon, who started in civic politics in Richmond, BC, then served many years here in this place as a cabinet minister, then retired to Caledon in my riding, where he was elected to the school board and served 2 terms as a regional district director. The second is Karen Hamling, who first was elected to Nakusp Town Council in 1987, then served as mayor from 2005 to 2018. To Karen and Tom and all those who have served or simply had the courage to run, I say thank you.
The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Madam Speaker, this week the Prime Minister and his government announced that they will force provinces that are not on side with their carbon tax to pay for it anyway. Now, this will affect families from across the nation. The Prime Minister expects Canadians to believe that sunny ways will prevail. In reality, this tax and grab scheme will make everyday living more expensive for Canadians commuting to work, feeding their families, or filling their gas tanks. How in the world can this government expect Canadians to get excited about a $12.50 per month return when in reality they know they will be paying much more? Sunny ways, hardly. Madam Speaker, it's more like gloomy days. When will this government start working for Canadians rather than expecting Canadians to work for them?
The honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
Madam Speaker, yesterday was International Artists' Day. Nos artistes et créateurs.
Our artists and creators in Canada are among the most talented in the world. They help to make our experience known and promote innovation through their creativity.
Edmonton has produced some of that remarkable talent enjoyed worldwide. This includes musicians like the late maestros Tommy Banks and Brian Kipping, or playwright-actor Darren Hogan, and recent inductees to Edmonton's Arts Culture Hall of Fame like saxophone player Raymond Barrell, choreographer Shelley Switzer, and choir master Laurier Fagnan. We would not be able to support and celebrate so many artists without all of those who support the arts, from patrons who buy tickets to a Winspear show, the Edmonton Opera, or the Art Gallery of Alberta, to philanthropists such as Diane and Irv Kipnis, who have a long legacy of supporting Edmonton and Canadian artists. Thank you and congratulations to all artists from coast to coast to coast.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The honourable member for Carleton.
The Prime Minister promised that the budget will be balanced next year, but this year the deficit is 3 times higher than promised. This week, the Bank of Canada increased the interest rate, which will force Canadians to pay higher taxes to pay for the interest on our debt. It's money for bankers and not for hospitals and highways. Will the economic statement tell us exactly when the budget will be balanced, yes or no? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. I would like to remember the member that in 2015, Canadians had a choice between austerity or growth, and we promised to give more to the middle class, and the results speak for themselves. We have the strongest growth in the G7 in the last year, and this year the OECD said that next year, Canadian families will be $2,000 richer than under the previous government because we are counting on what counts, on the welfare of Canadians.
The question was when the budget would be balanced. We still don't have an answer from this government. This Prime Minister, on another subject, is a high-tax hypocrite. He raised taxes on families by taking away the children's fitness tax credit, by taxing taking away their tuition tax credit and their education tax credit, while protecting his tax-funded nannies for himself. Now he has extended a sweetheart deal to large corporate industrial emitters while forcing others to pay the carbon tax. Will small businesses get the same exemption?
I just want to remind the member that it's not parliamentary language to call other members' names, and so I would hope that he will excuse his language after the fact. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
To stand up and talk about our climate plan, because I'm always hopeful that the other side will learn to understand that, 1, the climate change is real, 2, we need to take action, and 3, there's an economic opportunity. But let me talk about what folks are saying about our plan. The CEO of the Toronto Regional Board of Trade: a successful price on carbon should be transparent, revenue neutral, and provide support for trade-exposed industry. The board is encouraged with this announcement, largely satisfies those objectives. We look forward to working with the federal government to ensure the support provided to small and medium-sized businesses helps them remain competitive.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, it's no surprise that CEOs are happy with the Liberal carbon tax. That's part of the high tax hypocrisy, right? They get exempted if they run large industrial corporations. They get a 90% exemption on their emissions, while small businesses like plumbers and carpenters and pizza shop owners will pay the tax on 100% of the energy they use to run their businesses. So a simple yes or no question. Will small businesses get the same exemption from the Liberal carbon tax as the large industrial emitters? Yes or no?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Canadians want to know, yes or no, do the Conservatives have a climate plan that's going to meet their target? Now, Canadians would love to see this climate plan, but let's be clear. We have put a price on pollution for everyone, whether you're a small business or a big business, or all Canadians, because we know that polluting isn't free, that we've done this in a way that makes sense, that ensures that companies are competitive, and will also put more money in the pockets of Canadians, because we know everyone wants to be part of the solution, because everyone's feeling the impacts of climate change, and they also understand the huge economic opportunity of clean growth.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, the member still does not answer the question. She is giving an exemption to the large corporate industrial emitters. They get a 90% write-off on the carbon tax, whereas small businesses, who are the engine of job creation and growth in this country, will have to pay the tax on 100% of the energy they consume. It's just like when the Prime Minister protects his personal trust fund. Will the government end the high tax hypocrisy and extend the same exemption to our small businesses? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, always pleased to stand up and once again explain how our climate plan works, in the hopes that the Conservatives will finally have a climate plan that meets the target. We have a plan that ensures that everyone pays a price on pollution. But the approach we've taken for large emitters, it should be an approach that the Conservatives would support, because presumably they want good jobs to stay in Canada, they want big businesses to reduce their emissions, and they also want us to grow their economy. That's the approach we've taken. It's the approach followed in Europe, it's the approach followed in Alberta, it's the approach followed in Quebec, in California, and in China.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
And there's the admission that we were looking for. She said that we should support her exemption on the carbon tax for large industrial emitters, because that will keep jobs here in Canada, which means that applying that same tax to small businesses, who are the largest creators of jobs, will actually send jobs out of Canada. That is her admission. She admits the carbon tax will drive jobs out of this country. If that's the case for large industrial corporations, and that's why they're getting an exemption, will she extend that exemption to small businesses? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Once again, don't take it from me that our climate plan works. Take it from Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England. You need a price on carbon and you need a price on pollution. Canada, as of today, has both. It unlocks investment decisions which will make far more low-carbon economies. The Executive Director of the Canadian Associations of Physicians for the Environment. We strongly support this legislation. As health professionals, we are deeply concerned about the impacts that climate change is having and will have on the health of Canadians and people around the world. Why do the Conservatives insist on making pollution free?
The Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
Madam Speaker, Indigenous leaders have been calling on this government to fix their broken NEB process that approved the Trans Mountain Pipeline. This week, Grand Chief Stuart Phillips said, and I quote, "It's absolutely amazing that the Prime Minister is without conscience, without any sense of responsibility to the citizens of this country and future generations." Liberals claim their most important relationship is that with Indigenous peoples, but that means nothing if they won't do the right thing. Will the Liberals start listening and cancel the pipeline expansion once and for all?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Madam Speaker, we understand that protecting the environment, growing the economy, and respecting Indigenous peoples can be done at the same time. The NDP do not. The Federal Court of Appeal has provided us a very clear path to move this project forward in the right way, and that is what we are doing. I encourage the members of the NDP to read the whole TMX decision, not just the parts that they agree with. Merci, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
Clearly, Madam Speaker, this government just doesn't get it when it comes to the environment and the broken NEB process. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. Let's look at the facts. Indigenous leaders are saying it's broken. Environmental groups are saying it's broken. Residents of BC and Canadians from coast to coast are saying, you've got it, it's broken. What do the Liberals do? Let's trial this failed approach just one more time. What will it take for this government to acknowledge the process is broken and drop the expansion?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Madam Speaker, obviously we are following the Federal Court of Appeals decisions and the direction that they are providing us. They have told us that we need to be consulting more with Indigenous communities affected by the TMX pipeline, and that is exactly what we are doing right now. We respect the court's decision, and we are moving forward in the right way in meaningful dialogue. That is exactly what Canadians expect of us. That is what we're delivering. Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Madam Speaker, the Liberals like to claim they're the champions of the environment, but we all know it's only for show. Behind their smiles and nice speeches, behind closed doors, the Liberals are giving favours to their oil industry friends and are buying pipelines with our money. And when the Conservatives promised to bring back Energy East, a pipeline which was massively rejected by Quebecers, the champions of the environment are opening the door to that possibility. Will the 40 Liberal MPs from Quebec commit to never reviving Energy East? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Natural Resources. Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to answer that question. Energy East was a TransCanada business decision. I would also like to announce to the NDP that it's ironic that some members of the party support the LNG Canada project, which will create 10,000 jobs in the riding of the member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley. That project will be one of the most safest environmentally in the world when it comes to LNG. When it comes to the environment, we will ensure that Canadians trust our system. The member for Trois-Rivières. We are listening to what people are telling us, Madam Speaker. It's been weeks we've been asking the question and weeks that we haven't received an answer. The opposition to Energy East is massive in Quebec, in Trois-Rivières, Montreal, and Quebec City. Everybody knows that this pipeline threatens the St. Lawrence River and other rivers. But in Ottawa, no one is listening. On the one hand, the official opposition is promising to bring back the pipeline, and on the other, the government cannot close the door to that possibility. What will it take for the Liberals to listen to Quebecers and to say no once and for all to Energy East? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. It's clear, Madam Chair, that the NDP is against any major project. We are making sure that protecting the environment goes hand in hand with working with our First Nations partners. Canadians expect us to respect the environment, that we respect our First Nations, and that we also respect decisions by our courts. This is something the Conservatives don't understand, and it's clear the NDP also don't understand a thing either. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is an interesting question period. In answer to questions by the member for Carleton, the Minister of the Environment has said that large polluters will receive discounts because jobs might be lost. That's what the Liberal carbon tax is all about, jobs. So the question is simple, Madam Speaker, why are there two standards? Why will small businesses have to pay 100%, but large emitters will get a 90% discount? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. I'm very surprised that a member of Quebec, every MP or MPP in Quebec has supported pricing carbon. So why is a member from Quebec of the Conservative Party opposed to this? It's clear that we have to fight climate change. There is a cost to pollution. So I hope that the member will listen to Quebecers who want action on climate change, who want a price on pollution, and who want a green economy. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. We, Conservatives, we respect the jurisdictions of provinces, but the Liberal government is imposing its will on the provinces as well. In Quebec, the system applies equally to all. Large, small, medium-sized polluters all are treated the same way. But why does the Liberal Party have a double standard when Quebec is treating everyone equally? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it would be important for the member to speak to someone in Quebec who understands the system. The system we have for large emitters is that they will have to respect the same principles which are applied in Quebec, in China, and in the European Union. We want to make sure that our companies are more competitive, that they will bring down emissions, and they will create good jobs in Canada.
Madam Speaker, Canadians know that there's no way the Liberal carbon tax will save the money. Ferguson Fancy Beans in my riding says that the Liberal wind carbon tax alone cost them over $50,000 last year. On an admission of her own policy, the Environment Minister admitted that 90% of the exemption for big emitters focuses on keeping jobs here in Canada. Will this government extend this to Ferguson Fancy Beans as well?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think I'll once again turn to experts. So Stephen Harper's former Director of Policy. We think that the federal government is doing the right thing in putting a price on carbon in those provinces that have not done so, and in returning the money directly to households. This will encourage lower emissions while ensuring that Canadian families will not be negatively affected. Dale Bergen, from the Executive Director of Eco-Fiscal Commission. Bigger households get bigger checks, and most households' rebates will be larger than their carbon pricing costs. Households will see net gains.
The honourable member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Burt Baxter Transport, a family-owned and operated company in my riding, will deeply feel the consequences of this Prime Minister's failure to support small businesses in Canada. The forced Liberal carbon tax will increase the annual cost of diesel fuel for their trucks by over $400,000 by 2022. They will have to choose between charging their customers more or laying off many of their employees. Where is their discount?
Hear, hear. Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Whether you're a trucker or you're a farmer or you're a small business owner or you're an environmentalist or you're a child, we are all paying the costs of climate change right now. We're paying the costs through extreme weather events like floods, like droughts, like forest fires, and 90 people died in Quebec this summer because of extreme heat. We are now, the costs to Canadians, I have gone from $400 million to over $1 billion. The UN climate report projects that the cost to the world will be in the trillions of dollars if we don't take action now. It is not free to pollute. It should not be free to pollute, and our government will not allow it to be free to pollute.
Honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Speaker, Boombata Homes is an innovative company that will be hit hard by the Liberal carbon tax imposed on Saskatchewan businesses. It means families working hard to afford a home will now face even higher prices. It also means the Liberal affordable housing program will be more expensive. Jason and Susan know what it will mean for their business, their subcontractors, and their construction workers. They know an election gimmick when they see one. Why do large corporations get exemptions from this government and they do not?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
You know, when I talk to small businesses, and I've talked to small businesses across the country, what do they want to do? They want to do right by the environment. They want to be more energy efficient and save money, and they also want to lower their emissions. Let me give you the example of Veriform. It's a steel manufacturer in Cambridge. What did they do? They reduced their emissions by 80%, and they saved $1 million. We are going to support small businesses to do that, to be more energy efficient, so they can save money that they can reinvest in their businesses and create more jobs.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Well, Madam Speaker, we got a really deep dive into Liberal ideology earlier in question period when it comes to the carbon tax. The minister admitted that large emitters will be exempt to save Canadian jobs, yet small and medium-sized enterprises, which employ 80% of Canadians, will not be exempt. Why are these businesses and those jobs less important to the Liberals than large emitters? Isn't this just another attack on small business?
Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, it is always so surprising to hear the other side talk about how much they care about jobs. We have reduced the small business tax rate to 9%. We've created more than 500,000 jobs with Canadians. We have the lowest unemployment rate in decades. And you know what we're also going to do? We're also going to tackle climate change. We're going to save businesses money by helping them be more energy efficient. And you know what? At the end of the day, we're going to do what is critically important, is ensure that we have a sustainable planet for our kids.
The honourable member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Madam Speaker, a French court that was supposed to rule today on a decision that released Hassan Diab from a French prison and allowed him to come home to Canada has pushed that decision to next year. This nightmare saga has persisted for over a decade. But the government insists on carrying out a narrow review that will not even look at reforming our deeply flawed extradition regime Why won't this government just do the right thing and call a public inquiry?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, our government recognizes there is a legitimate interest in better understanding the process that led to Dr. Diab's original extradition under the previous government. The Minister of Justice has asked for an external third-party review of this matter so that a thorough review and examination of the circumstances of that extradition to France can take place. That independent external review is being led by Murray Siegel. Mr. Siegel has been given the tools, access, and discretion necessary to conduct a thorough review of the case, and we look forward to his report.
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
So Germany has cut off arms sales to the Saudi regime. There's no way this government can justify this arms deal to the House of Saud. So here's a simple plan. Number one, we cancel the deal. There's not an international body anywhere that'll take the side of the Saudis. Number two, impose the Magnitsky sanctions on these criminals. Number three, we repurpose the plant in London to build military vehicles for our troops who need the upgrades. And as for the Saudi Crown Prince, will the government do the right thing and tell him that we don't apologize to tyrants and he can go stuff his objections?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Nous condamnons le meurtre de Jamal Khashoggi.
In the Jamal Khashoggi affair, we demand that Canadians' arms exports are used in a way that respect human rights, and that's why we have committed to putting in place a more robust arms export system. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, we are actively looking at the existing arms exports permits to Saudi Arabia.
Speaker, November 20th, 2015, James Cudmore, the CBC's military affairs reporter, broke a story. The first sentence, the new Liberal government is delaying approval of a deal to convert a civilian cargo ship into a badly needed military supply vessel. December 21st, Mr. Cudmore wrote his last story about controversial problems in the Navy's procurement program. His last official day at the CBC, January 8th. He started work for the Defence Minister 4 days later. But on what day, Madam Speaker, did the Minister offer Mr. Cudmore a job?
The Honourable The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Again, I will quote sections on the Sub Judice Convention principle outlined in Chapter 13 of the House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition. The Convention recognizes the courts as opposed to the House as the proper forum in which to decide cases. And as Speaker Fraser noted, the Convention maintains a separation and mutual respect between legislative and judicial branches of government. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For Thornhill.
Well, Madam Speaker, the Conflict of Interest Act says a public office holder is in a conflict of interest when he or she exercises an official power, duty, or function that provides an opportunity to improperly further another person's private interests. Now, we know ministers often hire journalists for their communication skills to promote government policies. This seems to be the first time a journalist has been hired to block his communication skills, to shut him up. So, Madam Speaker, the date is important. When did the minister hire Mr. Cudmore and give him a job?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I was told that the date was provided. So, okay, but
I just ask members to allow the Parliamentary Secretary to answer the question, and if they have other questions, they'll be able to stand.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Sub Judice rule dictates that members are expected to refrain from discussing matters that are before the courts or tribunals, which are courts of record. Therefore, we will not be making further comment on that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. That's false, Madam Speaker. No date was ever provided to our leaders' offers with regard to when a job was offered to Mr. Cudmore and when he was hired. I don't understand how the 40 Liberal MPs from Quebec are willing to accept such absurd answers from their own government. Mario Dumont recently said with regard to the Irving lobby, I can't believe that Quebec's 40 Liberal MPs will agree to being less influential than one business family. My question is simple. Will the 40 Liberal MPs from Quebec finally stand up and ask the Prime Minister to defend Davies workers? And when was the job offer made to James Cudmore? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government does not comment and does not speculate on issues linked to a process before judicial process. We believe in an independent judiciary. I would like to remind the member that the sub judice rule cannot be violated by public declarations which might prejudice files issues which are before the courts. Thank you. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, a date. No commentary, just a date. That's all we're asking for now. What's so secret about a date? A day, a month, a year? All dates are public, Madam Speaker. I've got a calendar here. There are lots of dates. And it's like a multiple choice question. And not a single date is marked confidential. So what I'm asking for is simple and public. When exactly, on what date did the Liberal government make a job offer to reporter James Cudmore? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, the role of the House of Commons is to help to develop public policy and legislation and to apply them. Police forces conduct investigations and lay charges. The courts rule on individual cases. Therefore, it would be inappropriate to comment. Thank you.
In my riding of Essex, 1 in 4 kids live in poverty. That is unacceptable. Our food banks are strained, there's a lack of affordable housing, and hope for a minimum wage increase was just shattered by Doug Ford. The cancelled Basic Income Pilot Project in Ontario was helping us gather critical information on how to reduce poverty levels. While Ford continues to attack the most vulnerable, the Liberals are turning a blind eye. New Democrats join our leader Jagmeet Singh and call on the Liberals to continue this program. Will Liberals help? Or are they going to turn their back on vulnerable Ontarians too?
The Honourable Minister for Families and Social Development.
Of reducing poverty in Canada, because this has been the objective of our government since 2015. We have started by introducing the most innovative social policy in the generation, the Canada Child Benefit, which is lifting 300,000 children out of poverty every month, and there are 200,000 parents at the same time. We have launched in August the first ever poverty reduction strategy, which is going to reduce by a further 100,000 people in Canada poverty by March 2019. And we're going to look forward to work with other governments to make sure that this is well understood.
The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Madam Speaker, the application process for the government's co-investment fund is onerous and complicated for nonprofits. On the other hand, the rental construction financing initiative geared to the private sector has less stringent criteria for affordability, environmental assessment, and accessibility. Why do nonprofit groups have to jump through more hoops to get similar benefits? Will the minister listen to feedback, allow flexibility so these nonprofits can get down to work? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Madam Speaker, we had been so pleased and so proud to work since 2015 with a number of partners in Canada that had been waiting for a long time for the first ever national housing strategy of this country to be launched in November 2017. We've been delighted with the level of input, the quality of the advice that they were giving to us, and we look forward to work with them over the next 10 years on this $40 billion plus investment in the homes of all Canadians, in particular the more vulnerable ones. Thank you.
The
Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
Relationship is more important to Canada than that with Indigenous peoples, and our government is committed to building renewed relationships based on recognition of rights and mutual respect. The Lubicon were left out when Treaty 8 was signed in 1899, and as a result, they have been negotiating with the government for almost 40 years over their rightful title to lands and treaty benefits. Could the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations update this House on reconciliation with the Lubicon Lake Band?
Honourable Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations.
I'd like to thank the member for Edmonton Centre for his question and his ongoing advocacy. This week, we took a historic step forward on the path of reconciliation with the Lubicon Lake ban. After decades of negotiations, our government, the government of Alberta, Lubicon Lake ban have reached agreements to finally address this historic injustice, land compensation and community infrastructure. As Chief Billy Joe said, this means a brighter future, a brighter economic future for their people. We acknowledge Premier Notley and her late father, the late Jim Prentice, generations of Lubicon Lake.
The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Madam Speaker, Bill C-69 is putting a chill on investment in Canada's natural resources sector. The president of the Indian Resource Council said, quote, Bill C-69 will harm Indigenous economic development, create barriers to decision-making, and make Canada unattractive for resource investment. This legislation must be stopped. Hear, hear. To make matters worse, under this Prime Minister, Canadian energy investment has seen its biggest decline in more than 70 years. Unbelievable. When will the Natural Resources Minister kill this bill?
Here. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
We're very pleased with Bill C-69. Why? Because we listen to Indigenous peoples, we listen to business people, we listen to people in the resource sector, we listen to environmentalists, because what did we commit to? We committed to getting our resource market, but we also committed to rebuilding trust in how we do environmental assessments. We've come up with a system that engages Indigenous peoples early, that has shorter and tighter timelines as businesses were requesting. It also ensures that we make decisions based on science. We know to get our resources to market in a responsible way, we need a proper process. That's exactly what.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Energy investment has seen its biggest decline in more than 70 years. Canadian businesses are dying, people are losing their jobs, and tens of billions of dollars are going to the U.S. economy instead of ours. And the Prime Minister's No More Pipelines bill will only make it worse. Will the Prime Minister...
There seems to be a problem with translation. Est-ce que ça fonctionne maintenant?
Is it working now?
Est-ce que ça fonctionne? Oh. OK, je vais y aller après. OK. Ça fonctionne maintenant?
Is it working?
Before I continue, I noticed that I just missed out on one gentleman, so I will, one MP, so I will go back, and then I'll come back to the member. The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, the Liberals' No More Pipelines bill was passed by this House with the shameful support of 3 Alberta Liberals. But it's not too late to stop it. Yeah. Last week, the Alberta Chamber of Commerce told the Finance Committee that any pipeline company under C-69 would be foolish even to apply for any type of pipeline, while the Alberta crude differential hit $50 last week. Will the minister from Alberta do the right thing and kill this bill before it becomes the No More Pipelines law?
Do the right thing.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Actually, Madam Speaker, I'd like to basically tell the House once again about the important investment that LNG Canada is making actually in a pipeline that is going to new markets, that is being built in Kitimat. It's a $40 billion investment in the Canadian market, the largest ever private investment in Canada. It's going to create 10,000 jobs. Obviously, the Conservatives don't want to talk about that. At the end of the day, Madam Speaker, the Conservatives have failed to bring any new pipelines to new markets in 10 years. We will take no lessons from them. Merci.
Bravo. The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Madam Speaker, thanks to the Liberals, energy investment in Canada has seen its biggest decline in more than 70 years. Canadian businesses are dying, people are losing their jobs, and tens of billions of dollars are going to the U.S. economy instead of our own. And the Prime Minister's No More Pipelines bill will only make it worse. $100 billion lost and you're laughing. Will the Prime Minister stand up for Canadian workers, businesses, and our economy and scrap C-69?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Natural Resources.
Let me repeat my answer because I was obviously my colleague did not listen or did not hear what I had to say with respect to the $40 billion investment. It is the largest investment in Canadian history with respect to our natural resources market. Madam Speaker, at the end of the day, Conservatives failed to bring any new pipeline to new markets. We are making sure that we're going to do it in the right way. We are following the Court of Appeal decision to making sure that we're respecting Indigenous peoples, respecting the environment, and that's exactly what we intend to do, and we will make sure that we get it right. Merci.
I just want to remind members, they may not like the answer, but I would ask that they listen, and so that we can get to the next question in the proper fashion, and that I can also hear the answer. The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, what the Liberals failed to mention, Madam Speaker, is that $40 billion project is exempt from their job-killing carbon tax. Now the Liberals' No More Pipelines bill, C-69, is a threat to the livelihood of Canadians who depend on the energy sector for employment. New carbon taxes, downstream emissions regulations, and now C-69 will end energy investment in Canada as we know it. The record is clear. The Liberals have failed to get a pipeline built, and it's time for them to scrap this legislation. Will the Natural Resources Minister from Alberta do the right thing and kill this bill?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, after 10 years of inaction under the Harper Conservatives, 99% of the oil back in 2006 was being brought and sold to the U.S. markets. And in 2015, when they were voted out of office clearly, same thing, 99% of the oil was going to the U.S. markets. We are making sure that we're doing things in the proper way. We're following the court decision to make sure that we're bringing our oil to new markets. Merci.
The member for Elmwood Transcona.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Speaker, after a year and a half of work and several $1 million to try to solve the many problems of the Phoenix pay system, public servants are still not being paid properly. Many unions have suggested that there are resources in the system to make Phoenix work without waiting for a whole new system. There are solutions that exist. Is the government looking for them? When will they announce the next step toward a fair solution for public servants?
The honourable member for Public Services and Procurement.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are two possible paths on Phoenix. There's my path, which is to stabilize the system for public servants, and then there's the path of the Treasury Board. The President is trying to find a new solution there. We're working closely with unions, and we're going to do this together.
For Elmwood Transcona.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, but I think people need to hear a more concrete answer in terms of how we're going to make progress. That's why people doubt that we are going to make progress in a timely way. It's why civilian members of the RCMP are upset that the government has reversed a previous commitment not to put them on the Phoenix payroll system until it's fixed, and instead created an arbitrary deadline of 2020 where, come what may, they're going to put those RCMP members on the payroll system. Why are they risking doing material damage to the men and women of the RCMP when the payroll system isn't ready to go? And will they reverse the decision?
The Honourable Minister of Public Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I can assure everyone in this House that we are leaving no stone unturned to resolve the issues related to the Phoenix pay system. We are seeing progress. Yes, it is slow. We have reduced the backlog by 100,000 cases since January of this year. We have reduced the backlog of departments that are within the pay pod system by 21%. In the same time, we've paid out $1.5 billion in back pay with respect to collective agreements that weren't negotiated by the previous government. We are doing everything we can. We have 1,500 people working on this in the pay centre, and we are absolutely committed to getting this done.
The honourable member for Markham Unionville.
Madam Speaker, the opioid crisis is growing every year. The number of deaths due to overdose are increasing at an alarming rate. In 2016, there were just over 3,000 opioid-related deaths in Canada. In 2017, the number jumped up to almost 4,000. That is a 33% increase over just 1 year. These are preventable deaths, Madam Speaker. When will we see the real plan from this government to address this very troubling issue?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our government is deeply concerned about the tragic effect of the opioid crisis across the country. To address the crisis, we've responded through significant new federal investments, enacting new legislation, fast-tracking regulatory action, and going forward, we continue to address the crisis by increasing access to treatment, supporting innovative approaches in harm reduction, and addressing stigma related to opioid use. We will continue to work with our stakeholders to bring forward solutions to save lives and turn the tide of this national public health crisis.
The member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, that answer is not good enough. 16 Canadians are dying every day. In fact, Madam Speaker, more people are dying in Canada each year from the opioid crisis than from homicide, suicide, and traffic accidents combined. And the response of this Liberal government has been totally inadequate. They spent 4 times as much to legalize cannabis as they have trying to prevent and treat opioid addiction. When will the government take meaningful action to eliminate this crisis?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, our government is incredibly concerned about the opioid crisis and the price it has for Canadians on families. Building on our actions to date through Budget 2018, we're investing $231 million for additional measures to help address the opioid crisis, including $150 million for emergency treatment funding for provinces and territories. We earmarked $100 million to support the Canadian Drug and Substance Strategy and restored harm reduction as a core pillar, and we're providing urgent funding to provinces hardest hit by the crisis. We will continue to work with the provinces and territories to address this crisis.
Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, Madam Speaker, again, totally inadequate. The United States has recognized opioid addiction as a crisis, and they've spent 30 times the amount that was just announced, and they've focused their efforts to prevent overprescription and to prevent drugs from coming into their country. Can the Health Minister tell this House what actions have been taken to increase treatment capacity for the thousands of Canadians that need it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So as I said, we've earmarked $100 million to support the Canadian Drug and Substances Strategy. Unlike the Conservative government that was hard on crime and punishment, we're treating this as a harm reduction. We're looking for health strategies and science-based interventions to help people who are suffering from dependency to opioids. We've also addressed the manufacturing. So we've required Canadian labeling for all prescription opioids to clarify the recommended dosing, limit the quantity of opioids that should be prescribed for acute pain, and we're strengthening the warnings to people that this is a drug that could create dependency. Our government supported the passage of the good...
Member for Hall-Elmer.
Madam Speaker, for years, we've known that the Conservative Party's idea of helping Canadian families is sending checks to millionaires. That's what they did under Stephen Harper, and the fact that they voted against the Canada Child Benefit and against the indexation of the CCB shows that they haven't changed at all. Can the Minister of Children, Families and Social Development remind this House why the CCB has been called the most significant social policy innovation in a generation? The Honourable Minister of Children, Family and Social Development. Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I'd like to thank the member for Hall-Aylmer for his remarkable support for families in his riding. The CCB has been giving more families to 9 out of 10 Canadians tax-free since July 2016. It's allowed 500,000 children and their parents to be lifted out of poverty, and it's since the summer it's been indexed to the cost of living. Our government has committed to helping middle-class families, not just millionaires, and our CCB proves that. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-Chemin-Lévis. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Defence has contradicted himself. We need 2 supply ships. That's written in his own defence policy, which was tabled with great pomp in 2017. When will the Minister of Defence give the Obelix contract to the Davie shipyard? And why is he abandoning the Quebec economy and all of the workers at the shipyard? What are the Liberals waiting for to take action and protect our national security?
The Honourable Minister of Veteran Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defence.
I can assure the honourable member that this government has put more money into national defence in the past 3 years, and we will continue to investigate that inquiry. I will be sure to take that back to the minister. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Minister, the Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With November 1st around the corner, parliamentarians and Canadians will be waiting for the immigration levels plan. This past year, our minister announced an ambitious plan to grow our economy, help the middle class, and lead the world in welcoming those most vulnerable. Will the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister please inform the House on what to expect on November 1st?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, my honourable colleague from Nepean and all Canadians can expect good news on November 1st, and I thank him for the question. It's clear that he understands that a strong immigration plan is key to driving economic growth and creating good middle-class jobs for Canadians. That's why our government will continue to recruit top global talent, why we will resettle the world's most vulnerable, why we will reunite families again, cleaning up the backlogs left to us by the Harper Conservatives. And, Madam Speaker, we will build upon the record $30 billion contributed to Canada by international visitors and students last year alone.
The Honourable Member for Bapali-Monu. Madam Speaker, for 2 years, official language minority communities have been calling for the Official Languages Act to be thoroughly modernized. We did it in 1988, and yesterday the Senate tabled a report that came to the same conclusion. The Official Languages Commissioner last week came to the same conclusion. Yesterday, the Liberals presented interesting measures, but they're only going to apply in 2023. When will the Liberals stop taking our linguistic communities hostage, and when will they finally take action to start modernizing the Official Languages Act? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism, Official Languages and the Francophonie. Madam Speaker, we have heard the cry from Francophone communities, and we remain committed to protecting and promoting bilingualism. After having led vast consultations, we announced an in-depth review of the Official Languages Act. The proposed changes will support and strengthen our Francophone communities across this country. Madam Speaker, it was the Liberal government who created the Official Languages Act, and it is the Liberal government who will take the necessary steps to support our official language communities across the country. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Madam Speaker, Quebec's ADISC Association held its annual gala on Sunday, and its last 14 presidents think that the government should take this opportunity to give our artists some good news. We need to force streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Music to pay artists fairly, to fund our culture, and to showcase Quebec content. But that won't happen with just consultations, nor will it happen with piecemeal measures. Will the government pass a law on electronic commerce to ensure that laws continue to apply online?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage and Multiculturalism.
On this side of the House, we stand for our artists, and that is what we've shown in last year's cultural policy.
Historic investments of $3.2 billion in the cultural sector, including the CBC, the Canada Council for the Arts, Telefilm, and the NFB. Due to the previous Conservative government's inaction, our laws on culture predate the Internet, which is why we're reviewing them so that we can continue to support high-quality Canadian production. The principle of this review is clear. If you participate in the system, you will continue to contribute.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. They won't announce anything on the weekend. Madam Speaker, the government will review arms export permits to Saudi Arabia in the goal of getting some answers about what happened with Jamal Khashoggi. Do we really need to paint them a picture? The regime assassinated him, Madam Speaker. They did so in cold blood, just like they whipped Raif Badawi and imprisoned his sister, just like they starved children in Yemen and repressed their own population with light armored vehicles sold to them by Canada. The government has all the answers they need. Will they stop selling tanks to murderers?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
We are working with our allies to consider our options. We are currently reviewing arms exports permits to Saudi Arabia. All exports need to respect the conditions laid out in the permits. We've already frozen arms export permits in the past, and we will not hesitate to do so again. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Well, I guess we have to paint them a picture. Madam Speaker, last week the government forgave a $2.5 billion debt to Chrysler at taxpayer expense. They did so secretly without even listing the recipient in the public books. But that's not the only secret business they've been up to. GM also has a debt of over $1 billion and has since for 10 years ago. All week, when we ask what's happening with GM's debt, the government answers by talking to us about Chrysler. But GM and Chrysler are not the same thing. So who will pay for GM's debt? GM or the taxpayers?
The Honourable...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. The debt that the member referred to, well, there was an agreement concluded under the previous government. We evaluated all of the options to recuperate the money for Canadians, but this was a contract that was signed under the previous government. Thank you. That concludes oral questions.
Point of order. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Yes, Madam Speaker. I believe that there was an interpretation problem during question period because the Minister of Veterans Affairs seems to have really not answered my question. To enlighten me, I have here the defense policy of the Canadian government. I'm sorry, but no, that is not a point of order. That is a point of debate.
Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36(8), I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 32 petitions.
Introduction of government bills. Déclaration de ministre.
Statements by ministers.
Rapport de délégation
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees. Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motion.
Motions.
Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have two petitions to present today. The first one is with respect to Bill C-75, and this bill reduces the penalty for serious crimes such as forcible confinement of a minor, polygamy, terrorist acts, etc. And the petitioners are calling on the Prime Minister to defend the safety and security of all Canadians by withdrawing Bill C-75. The other petition that I have, Madam Speaker, regards Bill C-71, an act to amend regulations related to firearms. It does nothing to tackle firearms violence, but adds further red tape to law-abiding firearms owners. So they are calling upon the House of Commons to scrap Bill C-71 and devote greater resources to policing in Canada. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Présentation des pétitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Agreed? Is it agreed? Yes? Agreed. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Government orders, government bills, commons, resuming debate at report stage and on the motions in group number 1 of Bill C-76, Elections Modernization Act.
On était aux questions.
We were at questions and comments.
Member for Whitby.
And I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his speech. I listened to his speech, and he spent some time talking about the fact that we introduced time allocation on this particular piece of legislation. And we know that time allocation is necessary to advance legislation and to do the work that Canadians have sent us here to do. But I want to remind the honourable colleague that through the committee work and through the work that has been done, over 85% of the recommendations made by the Chief Electoral Officer have been included in C-76. We heard witnesses, 56 hours of witness testimony, hours of study, 24 at committee, hours of study on the recommendations of the Chief Electoral Officers, 36 hours. So in total, over 100 hours of study and prep have gone into what we see now as a very comprehensive piece of legislation. So I'm wondering why the honourable member thinks that we should take any lessons from their party when they introduced C-23. They only had less than 50 hours of study of the particular legislation.
Just to make something clear, do I not have 5 minutes left in my speech? We have questions and comments. And I verified and I was correct. What I would answer is that it's completely ridiculous in the current context. My colleague is going back years in the past. In the current context, there's almost not a single bill. The government's legislative program right now is almost nil. What are they presenting right now? We're still waiting to sign the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's done. We're waiting for NAFTA that's going to come here to be ratified. But otherwise, seriously, when you look, we voted, what, once this week? We're starting to wonder why we're here. The Liberal government is presenting absolutely nothing of significance. We had the opportunity to discuss and debate a really important bill, and they decided to invoke closure. And when we look at the legislative agenda, we should have all the time possible to further discuss this bill.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I sat for a number of years in opposition when Stephen Harper brought in legislation to change the Elections Act. And there was widespread understanding across Canada that what the Harper government was doing was very much undemocratic. And a good example of that was the voter identification card. Issues that Elections Canada itself had expressed a great deal of concern. It was, in fact, a tool that many Canadians genuinely would have liked to have used. This legislation is very proactive in ensuring that we're going to get wider participation in future federal elections. And I believe that that is a good thing. We saw a minister that through committee, Madam Speaker, that recognized that the legislation was even open to amendments. We saw amendments that were accepted and recommended from Elections Canada, amendments from the Conservatives, amendments from the NDP and the Liberals. We have seen significant progress on good legislation. My question is, why do the Conservatives continue to want to oppose for the sake of opposing? They have no intentions whatsoever if it was up to them.
For an answer, l'honorable député de Beauport-Limoilou.
Madam Speaker, our critics for institutional democratic institutions and other colleagues on the committee, Conservative colleagues, presented and tabled 200 possible amendments to this bill, amendments that would have strengthened not only the bill, but possibly given the Conservative the privilege and the honor to vote for this bill. Madam Speaker, I would say also that, you know, this concerning the citizens' cards to vote, 1 million cards in the last election were sent to citizens that contained erroneous information on it. Also, 87% from an Ipsos-Reid poll of Canadians, 87% of Canadians don't see why it is a problem to require them to have another identity card when they present themselves to the voting polls. And I would say also, Madam Speaker, that it's the basic of democracy to make sure that the person that goes to the polls to vote and choose the next government, that we make sure that the right person is on the card.
Reprise de débat. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it gives me great pleasure, of course, to stand in the House once again and today speak on C-76, which is the modernization of the Election Act. Mr. Speaker, as you know, throughout my speech, I will share some factors, how this bill touches many of my citizens in my riding. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the riding of Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake is the half circle, if you want, of the city of Halifax and Dartmouth. And we have a vast majority of communities that is part of the riding. And I want to touch on a few. For example, seniors in Nova Scotia. In the last 5 years, the riding of Sagamore Preston Chesapeake has had the most increase in seniors in Nova Scotia. We also have the highest number of military and veterans in our riding. 23% are from those communities, which is, again, extremely important. We have many youth and young families, many seniors, as I indicated, and today's speech will touch on how this bill will help these individuals and these communities.
Madam Speaker, without a doubt, this new law will permit a great deal more transparency for regions that vote. It will also improve accessibility for people who have difficulty getting to a polling station to vote. And we're going to make sure that the system is a lot more secure.
When we talk about democracy, we should start at the base here and see how this bill was prepared and presented here today. It's extremely, I want to thank the Minister for her excellent work and leadership in this, on this bill. But let's take, Mr. Speaker, how this bill came about, because that is what true democracy is. So, Mr. Speaker, we had the Chief Electorate Officer who made 130 recommendations to improve our electorate system. So those were, of course, reflected upon research and his consultation that he was able to come forward with. Out of those 130 recommendations, Mr. Speaker, about 87% of those were included in this bill. So this is not one party deciding the full framework of this bill, but a major part of it came from recommendations made there. Also, Mr. Speaker, we should add that the committee work, there was a lot of debates and many witnesses came forward to speak about how we could improve that system. And, Mr. Speaker, many recommendations, or amendments, I should say, Madam Speaker, came forward. There was, I wanted to make sure that the people in Canada are aware that the amendments, there were 70 amendments that came forward and were accepted. That is not one party controlling. That is what I call all parties coming together. We had 16 amendments that came from the Conservative side that were approved. We had 2 amendments that came from the New Democratic Party that was approved. So 70 approved altogether. That is a large number. And we also had some feedback and information that came about through discussion and debate at the Senate level. Madam Speaker, I want to touch on some of the key ones, as I said. Accessibility. Madam Speaker, one of my former students is the Speaker of the House today in the legislature in Nova Scotia. And Mr. Murphy, a former student, of course, had an accident when he was very young playing hockey, and he's in a wheelchair. And, Mr. Speaker, he has to have access to, of course, accessibility to federal institutions, but accessibility to voting as well. So we want to make sure that we're answering to his needs. We're making sure that we're answering to other Canadians that may have other challenges or disabilities, which is extremely important. People are able now to vote at home or vote in the residences where seniors may not be able to make their way to the voting station, Madam Speaker. So we even have in this bill some reimbursement for accessible changes, physical changes that may be made, or others to improve this. Madam Speaker, the second one that I want to speak about is our Canadian Armed Forces. If we could look back, the Chief Electorate Officer said that we had to improve and give much more flexibility to the Canadian Armed Forces in voting. That was a key recommendation, and we're moving forward on that, Madam Speaker. which is extremely important. So now our Canadian Armed Forces voters can choose the methods that they would like best to vote so that they can have access to that important democratic right. Also, we've increased, if you want, guarantees to the integrity of the vote. We've also increased information exchange between the Election Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces. So those were very important changes that were made to respond to, as I said earlier, a big part of my riding, which has 23% either in the military or veterans, Madam Speaker. We've also made it, we're encouraging more voters to vote. So how are we doing that? There's certain things that have been reinstated in this bill that was not there before, of course, with the so-called Fair Act bill that the Conservative had. And I say so-called because if you look closely, there was a lot of issues with that bill. And, Madam Speaker, we reinstated the voter's information card as a piece of ID. We've also reintroduced vouching, which was also removed in the Conservative bill. And this is another key measure to ensure that all eligible electorates are able to cast a vote. This legislation, as introduced by the Minister, contains limits as how vouching can be used to ensure that it cannot be used in a way to threaten its integrity. For example, Madam Speaker, an electorate can only vouch for one person in the same polling station, which is important to note, and the electorate cannot vouch for more than one electorate. And finally, an electorate who was vouched for cannot vouch for someone else. So that brings some limitations, if you want, to that vouching, but it's reinstated so that we can ensure that more Canadians are able to vote. And this will allow, as well, through this bill, over 1 million Canadians will have access to voting that did not have it in the past government bill, if you want, so-called fair measures or Fair Electorate Act. Madam Speaker, also important changes to this bill, I think that must be noted, is the ban of use of foreign money, which has been severely limited through this bill. Again, many of these changes coming through committee work, coming through recommendations from Chief Electoral Officer and others. We also have social networks must be created. We've created, I should say, a registry off of all digital advertising published. Again, we will be able to better track to ensure who spent what doing what, and then we will be able to follow on that. And finally, we've also had put in place some protection for the new registry for future electorates, which is young Canadians, the age of 14 to 17 years old. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I do want to finish by saying that this bill is a continued transparency that our government has brought forward since 2015. Bill C-50, which was a political financing bill, also the modernization of the Access to Information Bill, and finally the Accessibility Act, C-81, currently being debated. So, Madam Speaker, again, I want to thank committee members, I want to thank the Chief Electorate Officers, I want to thank Canadians for their input, and I know that this is a big improvement for Canadians, and we're looking forward to making sure that Canadians have a better access to voting for those party or the individuals that they so desire. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for his speech, but I want to correct a misrepresentation there. He's trying to say that we're limiting the amount of foreign funds, but the fact remains that organizations like the Tides Foundation or George Soros can donate into Canadian organizations like Dogwood, like Lead Now, and in fact, this legislation says that each organization can donate up to $1.5 million in the pre-writ period, which really means it's millions and millions millions of dollars of influence, some of which is, lefty Canadian influence and some of which is foreign-funded influence. And so would the member be open to changing this bill to either take the limit down to something that's minuscule, like $50,000 per organization, or to recognize that, in fact, they have not plugged the hole there?
The honourable member for Sackville-Preston-Chesapeake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for her question. It's a very important question, and we did the committee work, and there was a lot of reflection on that. We severely limited the possibility, but what we did that was really positive is that we were able to track now. We're able to see who's spending, what are they doing, how are they advertising, and we can follow up on that. We feel that this system will be right, but we will continue, of course, as we do with other bills, to look at ways of making it stronger. Thank you.
The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The honourable member in his speech made reference to the Unfair Elections Act of the previous Parliament. And of course, coming out of the last election, there was widespread agreement that those provisions should be repealed. But we're 3 years in now. We haven't seen a repeal of those provisions, even though I think there was consensus for that simple measure. Part of it is because they decided to do many other things in the bill and address other problems. So when we say, why did it take so long? The Liberals say, oh, well, you have to understand there's some very subtle synergies at work here in the various issues, and so it took a long time. But I think it was wrong to tie in those simple repeals with those other measures, because now we've gone past the April 30th deadline. So I want to ask the honourable member, yes, certainly we should address those other issues like foreign interference, but there's less consensus on how to go ahead with that, and I don't think they've got everything right. Why is it that straight-up repeal wasn't accomplished sometime in the last 3 years, and we're still waiting to get that repeal done, and there's questions about whether that repeal is going to be effective for the next election?
The honourable member for Sackville-Preston-Chesapeake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his question. Madam Speaker, I guess I have to tell the truth. And a lot about the truth is that the Conservative filibustering, I can tell you that the Conservative filibustering started on May 29th. And we were only able to get to the clause by clause by October 15th. So again, the Conservative government trying to ensure that, of course, they feel that their bill that they presented was the best bill, so they're just going to filibuster and slow down the process because they realize that the wrongdoings in their so-called fair electorate bill was not answering to the needs of Canadians. If they had been working closely with the rest of the parties, we would have this legislation through a lot sooner. Thank you.
We have time for a brief question. The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. I had a longer question, but we ran out of time, unfortunately. My colleague from Sunny Lambton brought up the issue of foreign funding. We've seen from the U.S. Treasury Department has confirmed Russian oligarch money, Russian government money has gone into Tides USA. Tides USA has sent that money to Tides Canada to interfere with our elections, interfere with lobbying against our oil business. Why has this bill not done more to prevent such issues as Russian money directly coming in to fund third parties attacking our democratic practices?
The honourable member for Sackville-Preston-Chesapeake, a brief answer, please.
Again, it's an important question. What we've put in place is a structure that will ensure that we will be able to determine who is investing what money, where is that money going, how is it going to be spent, and they'll have to report to that every 2 weeks to ensure that we are able to track closely. And this bill will allow us to do that, but it is also strengthening our electorate act. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the reprise de débat, the honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm happy to rise here today to speak to Bill C-76, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act. And I'm somewhat happily surprised to be able to get this speaking opportunity as we're debating this under time allocation. And, I think the irony, if it wasn't so serious, is a bit delicious, debating a bill that will change the rules around our elections, the foundation of our democracy, under time allocation. after only a couple of hours debate on the committee report. And it's doubly ironic because they used closure to limit debate on second reading debate as well. I remember that back in the spring. And maybe triple irony because in the previous Parliament, the Liberals used one of their opposition days to debate a motion that time allocation must never be used to cut off debate on any bill that touches on our electoral system. And here they've already done it twice. So, and the history of this bill, as the previous member touched on, goes back to that time, to the Conservative Bill C-23, the so-called Fair Elections Act of 2014. And if there ever was an Orwellian name for a bill, that was it. Among other things, that act made it more difficult for many Canadians to vote and ordered Elections Canada not to educate Canadians about the electoral process. And both the Liberals and the NDP ran in the 2015 election on a promise to repeal Bill C-23 and get rid of the first-past-the-post electoral system once and for all. So what have the Liberals done with regards to the Fair Elections Act? Well, in late 2016, they tabled Bill C-33 and then sat on it for 18 months, did nothing. Then they tabled this bill, C-76, which included the measures of Bill C-33 on April 30th of this year. And that's a little late because the Chief Electoral Officer had given the government a deadline of April 30th to pass legislation, any legislation around elections changes, because they had to be ready for the 2019 election. So the government was a bit late with its homework there. So here we are almost 2 years after the government tabled C-33, their first attempt at electoral reform, 2 years after they broke their promise that the 2015 election was going to be the last election run under the first-past-the-post system, and 5 months past the Chief Electoral Officer's deadline for legislation to be passed in time for the 2019 federal election. So what's in this bill? What's this bill that we've been waiting for all these months and years? To be fair to the government, I'll start with some of the good measures that we're happy to see on this side of the aisle. In fact, many of them are changes that the NDP has been calling on the government to do for some time. It limits the writ period of an election to 50 days, thus eliminating the chance for another marathon election like the 70-day campaign that we had in 2015, and that's great news for all Canadians, not just for candidates. And I'd like to thank my NDP colleague, the member for Cowichan Malahat Langford, for suggesting this to the government in the form of his private member's bill. And I'm happy to see two parts of this bill that encourage young people to get informed and get involved in the electoral process. And like many MPs, I go to a lot of schools to talk about government and the electoral process. During the Thanksgiving break, I spent a whole day at Grand Forks Senior Secondary giving classes on civics, and a couple of classes on biology as well, because I was a biologist in my former life, but that's outside the scope of this topic. The questions I get at school talks are often much more informed than those that I get at open town halls. And unfortunately, the turnout for young voters at elections is usually well below that of older voters. So I'm happy that Bill C-76 allows the registration of future electors between the ages of 14 and 17. This simple act has been shown in other jurisdictions to increase the proportion of young people who vote after they turn 18. Unfortunately, the Liberals voted down an NDP amendment to this bill that asked the government to study the possibility of lowering the voting age to 17. We allow young Canadians to join the military at age 17, but for some reason we don't want to give them the right to vote in our elections, to give them a voice for their future in this country. And second, this bill removes the ban on public education programs conducted by the Chief Electoral Officer through Elections Canada. Why this ban was put in place in the first place in the so-called Fair Elections Act is beyond me, but I welcome the opportunity for Elections Canada to actually inform and educate Canadians about the electoral process. Bill C-76 also brings back the process of vouching to allow electors without proper ID to vote, as well as allowing the use of the voter ID card for the same purpose. And these were, again, disallowed under the Fair Elections Act in an effort that seemed to want to solve a non-existent problem, that of voter fraud, for which there are vanishingly few, if any, examples of by creating a much more serious problem that inhibited Canadians, particularly disadvantaged citizens, from voting at all. We should be encouraging Canadians to vote, and this will be a step in the right direction at last. Unfortunately, the government missed an opportunity to increase gender equity in Canadian elections, to increase the number of women running as candidates. This government talks glowingly about its commitment to gender equality, but does next to nothing in this bill to advance that. Canada is far behind other countries in gender equity in political representation. My former colleague, Kennedy Stewart, now the Mayor of Vancouver, I might add, put forward a private member's bill which would have strongly encouraged parties to increase the proportion of female candidates in future elections. But unfortunately, the government voted that bill down and failed to include its provisions in this bill. And there's no ban on foreign third-party spending or activity. We've seen evidence how foreign activity has affected elections in the United States and the UK, and I think we need to ban that from Canadian elections. We hear almost daily stories of election tampering in those areas and others. Canadians are deeply concerned about privacy issues during election campaigns. Political parties amass huge amounts of personal information on voters, and yet there's nothing in this bill that covers that, nothing. The present Chief Electoral Officer, Stéphane Perreault, said in committee, if there is one area in which this bill failed, it is privacy. The parties are not subject to any kind of privacy regime. And the Privacy Commissioner, Danielle Therrien, said that the bill has nothing of substance in regards to privacy. No one at committee spoke against more stringent privacy requirements. Everyone was concerned that we did not go far enough. Madam Speaker, I'll close by bringing up the big thing missing from this bill, and that, of course, is real electoral reform. The Liberals and the NDP and the Greens all campaigned in a promise that 2015 would be the last election under first past the post. That represented over 60% of Canadian voters that supported that idea. And for many Canadians, that was the most important promise of the election. Canadians were tired of elections that gave parties with less than 40% of the vote 100% of the power in a majority government. The Harper government was an example, and the present Liberal government is another. Unfortunately, once the Liberals got that power, they forgot about that promise. So, Madam Speaker, the Liberals say they want to increase the participation in Canadians in the electoral process. They say that Bill C-76 is their answer to this. But the incredible cynicism on their lack of action on real electoral reform has already had a negative effect on how Canadians feel about their elected representatives and whether it's even worth voting in the next election. So I'll close by simply saying that I support many of the reforms contained in Bill C-76, but it falls short in so many ways. And like so many bills we see in this place, it's a step in the right direction. It's a tentative step in the right direction. But we need to go farther. Let's get rid of big money in elections. Let's ban foreign interference in elections. Let's protect the privacy of Canadians. And let's get back on track to getting rid of first past the post so that every vote will count. Thank you.
Questions and comments? You're going to remember for Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his speech. He was able to share quite clearly the areas of strength and areas where he's concerned, and I really appreciate that. That's how parliamentarians work together to improve the system. I, too, an educator by trade, and when I go into the schools and have an opportunity to talk to young people about our political system, they want to learn more. They want those opportunities. So it's our job to work with them to try to support them as they go through this important process. He spoke about the electoral reform, and I too personally was in favor of preferential voting. I believe that the 51% absolute majority would have been a very good system. However, Madam Speaker, the Canadians did not clearly support one or the other throughout the various surveys that we tried, and therefore we couldn't move forward. But I'd like the honourable member to maybe speak, as I did, about the Canadian Armed Forces or or seniors or disability people with disabilities to how in his riding this bill will support those individuals. Thank you.
The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, Madam Speaker, I just have to comment on how the honourable member started his question, and that is around, whether, they said not enough Canadians were in favour. They didn't ask Canadians. They had some very bizarre, silly questionnaire that was sent out that absolutely proved nothing. If anything, it proved that Canadians want to change. We have to, he talked about, talking to young people. I talked to a woman in my riding who she and her husband and their kids got together in the last election and really learned about the party platforms, and then they let their kids decide on who to vote for in the election. And she didn't tell me who they voted for, but she said her kids are so disappointed at the cynicism of the kids had decided that electoral reform was the big promise that would mean more to them in the future. And going back on that promise has made her kids so cynical they may never vote in the next election when they wanted to improve that chance.
Yeah. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. He shares a lot of the same concerns I have about foreign meddling in the election. He talked about keeping big money out and foreign funding out from interfering with our elections. I'd like to hear more on his thoughts on how he thinks this bill doesn't go far enough and what his solutions may be for that.
The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, I'd like to thank the member from Edmonton West for that. A great question. The NDP is very much in favor of getting foreign meddling, whether it's through money or through undue influence and hacking. That's what we want to stop. We don't want to see what happened in the United States or in Brexit. I know the Conservatives want to have put forward proposals about stopping foreign organizations from donating money to Canadian elections. We say fine, but let's talk about foreign corporations as well. When we have small Canadian organizations that are concerned about the environment getting involved in our elections, they might get a bit of funding from the United States, but they're fighting foreign corporations like Kinder Morgan, like Chinese oil companies. So it's a very David and Goliath situation, and if we're going to get rid of foreign money, let's get rid of it all, not just pick who cannot donate.
Reprise de débat. The honourable member.
Resume debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in the House to participate in the report page debate of C-76, the Election Modernization Act. This bill represents a generational overhaul of the legal framework that governs our federal elections, one of the most important events in our Canadian democracy. I would like to pay particular attention on my intervention on one of the key challenges that Bill C-76 addresses. That is the use of foreign funding by third parties for activities that would aim to influence the outcome of Canadian elections. And Madam Speaker, I'm sure you've heard a number of questions related to this, so I'm hoping I'll be able to answer some of them in my comments. The use of foreign interference in domestic democratic processes is a very complex one that requires government-wide response. The government is taking these threats very seriously, and the Minister of Democratic Institutions is working closely with her colleagues to protect our electoral processes from these nefarious acts. Madam Speaker, before I would continue with my remarks on this important issue, I'd first like to thank our colleagues who are members of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. I will refer to them as PROC, or the committee from now on. They have conducted a thorough study of this important piece of legislation and have advanced the proposal which we are now considering. And Madam Speaker, I would like to add that there was a total of 100 hours of study, and I really want to commend them for their work. Even before this bill was introduced by the minister, the comprehensive study of the recommendations of the Chief Electoral Officer, which the committee conducted over the last year, greatly contributed to the development of this strong piece of legislation. And I want to reiterate, it was mentioned before, that over 85% of the Chief Electoral Officer's recommendations are included in the current piece of legislation. Further, the discussions held by the PROC committee on this bill, including hearing from expert witnesses last spring, have resulted in amendments which are making this important legislation even stronger, including with respect to combating foreign interference in Canada's federal elections. Madam Speaker, I would like to take a few moments to remind members of this House of important measures that are included in the Act as introduced by the Minister of Democratic Institutions. The government believes that these measures will help ensure that only Canadians get to influence the outcome of our Canadian elections. First, Bill C-76 prohibits foreign entities from spending any money to influence elections. Previously, they were able to spend up to $500 without being regulated. Now, Canadians who are watching might be saying, member from Whitby, there is no problem with $500, but it is true that it might not seem like a lot of money, but when compared to hundreds and thousands of dollars being spent by political parties and candidates during an election campaign, this gets to be problematic. That said, a zero-tolerance approach tells foreign entities to stay clear away from our elections in unequivocal terms. It is, therefore, an important loophole that C-76 is closing. The message is clear. Canadian elections belong to Canadians, and it is not the place of foreigners to have a say in who should have a place in this chamber. Another important feature of Bill C-76 that also contributes to this objective is the creation of the pre-election period, with spending limits imposed on political parties and third parties. This measure is necessary to respond to the reality that fixed-date elections have changed how political actors behave in the lead-up to the election campaign. During his testimony before PROC last spring, Mr. Michael Powell, a renowned professor of constitutional law, stated that the creation of the pre-election period is, and I quote, an extremely important and overdue amendment to the Elections Act, end quote. The government believes that failing to impose limits that lead up to the issue of the writ would create a real risk for the level playing field, a feature of our democratic life. That is why we are committed to adapting the legislation to modern realities. These changes related to the pre-election period also provide an additional transparency measures for third parties. Amongst these measures, we count the obligation that the election-related transactions be processed through a Canadian bank account, open specifically for that purpose. Third parties, whether organizations or an individual, who receive contributions for more than $10,000 or that have relevant expenses in that amount will be obligated to submit reports to the Chief Electoral Officer detailing expenses incurred and contributions received. These interim reports will be due upon registration and on September 15th. A final financial report will continue to be required after polling day. Making these reports public as soon as possible in the pre-election period will provide Canadians with more tools to know who is trying to influence their votes. It is our responsibility to ensure that Canadians have access to all the information possible so they can make an informed decision. The amendments approved by PROC will strengthen this third-party transparency regime even more. Members of the Standing Committee adopted an amendment that would require reporting on their expenses, third parties, organizations, or individuals during the election period. More specifically, they would have to submit reports to the Chief Electoral Officer 21 days before polling day and 7 days before polling day. This is an important improvement for ensuring greater transparency, particularly when we think that third parties do not face the same limits as political parties and candidates in receiving contributions from individuals or other entities. I commend the members of PROC for this measure, which nicely complements the set of amendments to the Canada Elections Act that were already introduced in the bill by the Minister. Madam Speaker, there is another key amendment that was adopted by PROC that relates to foreign influence. Indeed, PROC adopted the new prohibition on third parties using foreign funding for their partisan activities at any time. Let me be clear, the Canada Elections Act already prohibits the use of foreign funding for election advertising by third parties during the election period, irrespective of when the money was received. Bill C-76 already expanded the scope of third parties' activities that are covered by this prohibition. Not only will it be prohibited to use foreign funding for advertising, it will also be prohibited to do so for partisan activities or election surveys. Further, the Elections Modernization Act also extends this prohibition to activities during the newly established pre-election period. The amendment to the bill that was passed by the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs extends this idea further by prohibiting the use of foreign funding by third parties for partisan advertising and activities at any time. Madam Speaker, this addition to Bill C-76 will reinforce the rules that frame the participation of third parties in our federal elections. What will this prohibition mean concretely? It would mean that it will be prohibited for anyone, individual, corporation, or non-government organization to use foreign funding to conduct activities or transmit advertising supporting or opposing a specific political party. I will say it once more. Canadian elections belong to Canadians. Bill C-76, which was improved by the work of our colleagues on the PROC committee, is making giant steps in ensuring that our elections are protected from foreign intervention. Once again, I would like to thank the members for their insightful study of Bill C-76. The Election Modernization Act will make our election process more secure, transparent, and accessible, and it will modernize the administration of elections in this country. It is an important piece of legislation to reinforce the protections against foreign interference in our democracy and for the future of Canadian democracy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Comments? The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much to our member from Whitby. Just a question. I heard at the beginning of the speech she indicated about the foreign funding and how foreign funders cannot put into Canadian elections. Here in Canada, we know that. But what happens when it is a third party? What happens when that money is received 6 months in advance and then put in during that? Can she please share with me how that is not contravening what we are talking about here today?
Member for Whitby.
Madam Speaker, the amendments and the Act itself has made it very clear that we are strongly wanting the Canada elections to remain in the hands of Canadians. So when there's no foreign investments allowed at any particular time. But as my colleague said, if there is investments made to partisan activities, it needs to be reported. It needs to be registered with the Chief Electoral Officer, and it needs to be transparent for Canadians to see. One of the things that we want to ensure is that Canadians are aware of who is trying to influence their elections at any particular time. So there has been put steps within this piece of legislation to ensure that they are reporting when they are receiving money and how that could influence or unduly influence an election in the future.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
One of the deep concerns I have about this legislation, and I am pleased that a number of the Conservative attempts to suppress votes through the identification system that they use targeting Indigenous people is being replaced. But the question of this government's decision to ignore the all-party committee recommendation from the Ethics Committee regarding the need to put political parties under a credible form of privacy regime is very disturbing. We have the privacy commissioner spoken about this. We've studied the Cambridge Analytica scandal. We see in Europe they're talking about this new digital political arms race that can undermine elections by allowing political parties and third-party operators to maintain very large amounts of data that can be used to interfere and suppress votes. We saw this in the United States. We saw this in England. I'm asking my honourable colleague why this government has ignored the recommendations of the Privacy Commissioner and the all-party recommendations, including the Liberal members that sit with her, on the need to ensure a quality and credible privacy regime for this coming election.
Member for Whitby.
Madam Speaker, one of the foundations of our democracy is ensuring that our electoral process is inclusive and that Canadians are given the opportunity to vote. In this piece of legislation, Madam Speaker, it introduces a more equitable opportunities and a more accessible opportunities for people to vote, and in fact makes it more inclusive for individuals to vote in our electoral system. Madam Speaker, when we talk about individuals who possibly do not have the proper identification to go to vote, the voter information card allows to provide proof of address. That combined with ID could allow individuals to vote. We've reinstated vouching, Madam Speaker. We've made it the provisions for women to be able to participate in have increased participation of women in our electoral process by having their expenses for childcare paid, for example. Madam Speaker, the provisions for individuals with disabilities to be able to work at home, redefining what disability means, making it using the term accessibility. Madam Speaker, I think there's a number of different initiatives within this piece of legislation, and again, thanks to the PROC committee for their work to make this legislation allow more Canadians to be included in our electoral process and have the democracy stay in the hands of Canadians.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's always a good day when we can stand in the House and talk about, well, let's talk about electoral reform today, Madam Speaker. And wow, what an important piece of legislation. So important, Madam Speaker. I saw you shaking your head at me. I thought you were shaking your head in distraction, not necessarily at me. Okay, that's good. So far, I'm in the good books. Madam Speaker, this piece of legislation is so important. The government says this is a critical piece of legislation that really is, it's of importance and significance to this government here. So important that they have once again forced closure on debate, Madam Speaker. And let me refresh the memories of those that are paying attention and those that are in the gallery. It's a packed gallery today on a Friday, which I'm glad to see. And I know that there are so many Canadians listening to this riveting debate, and this speech is going to be just another one of those riveting speeches. Madam Speaker, it was in 2015 when the member of Papineau at that time, when he was campaigning on the Liberal plan, real change. He said, you know, under our government, we are going to be the most open and transparent government in Canadian history. Wow, we've seen how that is. He also said that we will let the debate reign. And then he targeted, of course, the former administration and how closure was used and how unacceptable that was, and that he was, you know, again, Prime Minister Harper, in whichever way that they framed it, was silencing Canadians and their voices and those that they elected to be their voice. And here we sit, over 50 times closure has been enacted on legislation. Why? Because, well, if the Liberals don't like what they're hearing, then they just pick up their toys and they run off to another sandbox, which is sad. Sad. And Madam Speaker, I know you've heard me say this before, but on a piece of legislation that is so important, I think it's important to mention this again today. And I will remind my colleagues across the way, I remind Prime Minister Trudeau that this House does not belong to him. It does not belong to those of us that are here. It belongs to the electors, those that elected the 338 members of Parliament to be their voices. And when he and his team enact closure, he is essentially saying to Canadians and those that elected the opposition that their voices don't matter. Madam Speaker, that is shameful. Yeah. Shameful. Now, the government would like you to believe that the electoral changes that were implemented by Prime Minister Harper and his team in the last administration somehow, well, it targeted some of our most marginalized Canadians, that it was unfair, that it was just another way for the Conservatives to attack Canadian democracy. Madam Speaker, highest voter turnout in the 2015 election. Highest voter turnout. And as a matter of fact, the changes that our previous administration enacted actually increased the number of acceptable forms of identification, making it easier for those that might not have a driver's license or might not have a passport. It made it easier for people to actually vote and say that they were Canadian. We believe, and I hope all Canadians and all of our friends in this call in this House believe that, well, we need to make sure that who is voting is who should be voting. Only Canadians have a say as to who we are electing to govern this beautiful country of ours. It is important that those that are sitting in this House are there, that are representing Canadians. They're not there, they're not backed by, well, let's say, foreign funds. Now, Speaker, it is really interesting that, we sit and we listen to this talking points that is spewed time and time again. The gentleman from Sackville Press in Chestercut stands up and he's very animated. I love listening to his speeches and love that he tied it back to his community. I will remind those, I always have to take the moment to remind those that it was his family that received a lucrative surf clam quota from the former fisheries minister. Open and transparent, Madam Speaker. Open and transparent. It is transparent that if you have Liberal connections, well, you get the quota. If you have Liberal connections, well, you know what? You get the appointment. And if you are connected to the Liberal Party in any way, and you might be a foreign entity, well, guess what? We're going to gear our legislation to help you out, whether it is C-68, C-69, C-55, and now we're seeing C-76. Madam Speaker, in 2015, a total of 114 third parties poured $6 million into influencing the election outcome, and many of those third parties were funded by U.S.-based Tides Foundation. That should strike fear in every Canadian. Madam Speaker, if I seem a little bit more animated than I normally would be, it's because, guess what, Madam Speaker? There was an organization called Lead Now. And in 2015, Tides Foundation donated $1.5 million of U.S. money to Canadian third parties such as Lead Now. And Lead Now, actually, right after the election in 2016, they won an international award, Madam Speaker. And they proudly, anyway, Canadians can actually go to their website, www.leadnow.ca. I can't guarantee that the report will be on there after this debate. But it's on there, and the pictures are on there. They proudly boast how they organized, and they funded the dollars into Canada to third-party groups. I know some of my colleagues across the way are quickly going on their iPads and their iPhones checking this out right now. And if they do, there's a picture, Madam Speaker, where Lead Now received an international award for defeating Stephen Harper. And they proudly boast that this is how they did it. They had hundreds and hundreds of paid volunteers. Paid volunteers, how is that? It's oxymoron. Sounds like they're in the military. Except if they're in the military under this Liberal government, they ask you to do more, but they're not necessarily going to pay you for what you're doing. They're going to take away your sleeping bags and your rucksacks and give you used aircraft. But these paid volunteers went all over the place to 29 target ridings, 29 target ridings where they thought was going to be the most vulnerable. Conservatives were going to be the most vulnerable. And they hammered it with all of their media, all of their flyers. And they went to universities and they went to all of these groups and said, we've got to get out the dirty cons. And you know what? This is the way to do it. So it's fairvote.ca, votetogether.ca. They always got the .ca to make it look like it's a Canadian company. It's all been funded by U.S.-based companies, or countries, and companies. And Speaker, I was one of those ridings that they targeted. So they succeeded in 25 of those 29 ridings, but they did not take my riding. And I challenge them to come and try it again. Madam Speaker, for those that are listening in, it's very real. It's not that we're trying to be divisive. We're not trying to sow the seeds of fear. It's real. Canadians should pay attention to where that money is coming from. Whether it's Greenpeace, WWF, Tides Foundation, all based on, you know what, we're going to make the planet a better place. And many of the people that are in the senior offices take up senior positions in this government. You know what? Gerald Butts, Madam Speaker, what did he do previously? President CEO of WWF, World Wildlife Foundation. Where did they get the core funding? Tides Foundation. Calling the shots for the guys across the way. Really probably setting all the policy objectives. In some of our most senior cabinet ministers' offices, all ties to foreign-funded groups with an agenda. So what we see with this bill right here is payback. What we see with C-68 is payback. What we see with C-69 is payback. C-55, it's payback. You know what, Madam Speaker? I have fishermen and fishing industry organizations that say they can't get a meeting with a minister unless they go through an NGO, and that's shameful. Going back to this bill in my last 10 seconds, the only people that matter most, Madam Speaker, are those that elect us here, and that should be Canadians. We stand here for Canadians, always. Canadians should have a say on who votes and who represents them, and they should also have a say in the debate. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Whitby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his speech. And yes, and you know, again, I want to thank the PROC committee and others for their strong study of this bill. And Madam Speaker, I do that. I preface it by saying that I want to thank them because they've made a number of amendments to this piece of legislation and did a lot of work doing it. And one of the amendments made to this bill will remove or make foreign funding for partisan activity illegal in Canada. So with all that the member has just said, with this amendment, will he now be supporting this piece of legislation?
The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
I'm sure it's been brought up time and time again in this debate. These groups are still funding, these foreign groups are still funding to their Canadian entities. So the Canadian entity can take out advertising, the Canadian entity can have programs, and they're still seen as a Canadian entity. But where does their core funding come from? U.S. Exactly. It's foreign funding. Exactly. They can pivot all they want. Madam Speaker, it's interesting. I want to actually, how soon they forget when they get in the House. Here's a quote from the Member of Parliament from Gatineau, who in the last administration said this, the misuse of voter information cards is quite simply out of control. We have reports of neighborhoods where individuals, single-family dwelling mailboxes, and not apartments were systematically demailed. How soon they forget. And we're going to let debate reign. Over 50 times of closure on debate. Open and transparent. Well, we've seen how that is. And now, all of a sudden, sanctimoniously, they can stand up and say, "Hey, we're solving the world. We're going to this and that." And we've got them on record, Madam Speaker. I'll remind all of our colleagues that what they say in the House is always. We can always go back to those records. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And, you know, it's an interesting process that I've been able to witness, both from an opposition point of view, when we have Stephen Harper's legislation, in which there was a general consensus of every region of this country that what he was doing was very much undemocratic. Compare that to the legislation that we have today. And generally speaking, fairly wide support in all regions of the country. We had a Harper government that wouldn't tolerate any amendments, unless it was a Conservative amendment. Here we have Elections Canada advocating changes that were accepted for amendments. We had even Conservative amendments recognized as some of them as good and were accepted. We had New Democratic amendments that were accepted and passed on, Madam Speaker. Two different approaches, two governments. The Harper government, thank goodness it's gone, and the current government, Madam Speaker, a government that truly believes in the democratic principles. I'm wondering if my friend across the way would at the very least acknowledge what it is that I have said is in fact accurate, because it is, Madam Speaker, and if we were to let the Conservatives go indefinitely on this, they would never let this bill come to a vote.
The honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Well, Madam Speaker, the Parliamentary Secretary's word count went up today. That's the good news, I guess. Madam Speaker, I want to remind the House on this. And it was just again in the previous administration where I believe the Parliamentary Secretary was also at the same committee meeting, where the MP from Gatineau, who at the time was also the national director of the Liberal Party, said, and I quote, "I was going to comment on Mr. Hahn's observation about the bus with 40 people. Suffice it to say that we are concerned, as it seems to be, about what we call serial vouching. And we're profoundly troubled by the number of on-site registrations. 55,000 at advanced polls, plus 795,000 on election day polls, for a total of 840,000, or an average of over 2,700 people per riding." That's shameful, Madam Speaker. How soon they forget. It's always interesting for my honourable colleague across the way. I love listening to his speeches. He gets up every day, but sometimes I just wonder if it's not so much about the substance of the debate, or if it's just about getting his word count up. Have that.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I can assure the member that when I'm afforded the opportunity and the privilege to stand and rise inside this chamber, it's because, in good part, I'm a very opinionated, passionate individual that understands and appreciates the many issues that the former Conservative Harper government messed up on. And sometimes you need to remind members opposite in terms of just to the degree in which they brought in legislation in such a way in which it needs to be fixed. And that's, in essence, in good part, what this legislation is doing. It's even going further than that, Madam Speaker. I made reference to Elections Canada and some of the changes that were brought forward by Elections Canada at the committee stage in terms of recommendations and thoughts. And we saw a committee that spent numerous hours debating not only the line-by-line discussions, but having dialogue with individuals, both individuals and stakeholders from all the different regions of the country. And some of those representations came from Elections Canada, both in a formal way through the committee process and informally through other mechanisms that they have, Madam Speaker. And I believe that what you have seen in the committee stage is wide support for the need to look at ways in which, yes, we can improve the legislation with an open mind, and a general attitude that was on the Liberal side of that committee, and that was that you don't have to be a government member in order to have an amendment pass. And, Madam Speaker, I sat on the PROC committee for a number of years, and the Elections Act was one of those. And the Conservative government, the Harper government, seemed to be of the opinion that only government amendments could actually be allowed to be passed. And in fact, when Elections Canada made presentation and virtually pleaded on many different areas, Elections Canada, an independent agency, Madam Speaker, the Conservative government often, more often than not, would close their ears to it, Madam Speaker. We have a government that took a great deal, or made a great deal of an effort in terms of consultations prior to bringing the legislation into this House.
And then after bringing it into the House, there was a number of individuals that had the opportunity to address the legislation. It went to committee, and it was very extensive. And not only did we have long discussions at the committee stage, but as I pointed out in my question, Madam Speaker, is that the government listened and made amendments that were brought up at the committee stage by some of those stakeholders, including Elections Canada, Madam Speaker. It also went further to include members of the New Democratic Party and the Conservative Party, where they were able to demonstrate their amendments and that those amendments were something that we could move forward on. We did just that. Now, Madam Speaker, you listen to the Conservatives today, and they have, and let's be very clear on this, after it's passed through committee, now we're into report stage, and the Conservatives moved, another 170-plus amendments. The real intentions of the Conservative Party is to kill this legislation. As they say yes, and they affirm exactly what I just said. And it wouldn't take much. They don't need 179 amendments, Madam Speaker. It's easy for the Conservative Party to attempt to kill it, and that's why the government at times needs to take the tools that it has to ensure that we can pass this legislation, Madam Speaker. That is something that is important, and even when I was in opposition, argued at times the government needs to take the tools that's there in order to pass legislation, because at times opposition is so obstructive that they will prevent legislation, good, solid legislation, such as that we have here today, Madam Speaker, from passing. And that's why we have to do what it is that we have to do in order to get this legislation through, Madam Speaker. And
As it is 1:15, pursuant to order made on Thursday, October 25th, 2018, it is my duty to interrupt the proceedings and to put forthwith every question necessary to dispose of the report stage of the bill now before the House. The question is on motion number 1.
A vote on this motion also applies to motions numbers 2 to 17, 19 to 28, 33 to 36, 41 to 44, 50 to 74, 80 to 83, 85 to 92, 106 to 114, 116, 117, 120 to 130, 134 to 137, 139 to 146, 149 to 157, 159, and 163 to 179. Si la motion numéro 1 est rejetée, il faut...
If motion 1 is rejected, we'll have to vote on motions 29, 118, and 160.
Number 1, Ms. Kusi, seconded by Mr. Nader, move that Bill C-76 be amended by deleting the long title. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt this motion? Que tous ceux qui appuient la motion...
All those who support the motion will please say yay. All those opposed will please say nay.
À mon avis, les oui l'emportent.
My opinion, the yeas have it.
The recorded division on the motion stands deferred. Le vote par appel nominal s'appliquera...
The vote will apply to motion 2 to 17, 19 to 28, 33 to 36, 41 to 44, 50 to 74, 80 to 83, 85 to 92, 106 to 114, 116, 117, 120 to 130, 134 to 137, 139 to 146, 149 to 154, 159, and 163 to 179.
Number 18. Madame Coucy, appuyée par...
Ms. Kusi, seconded by Mr. Nader, moves that the Bill C-76 on Section 45 be amended by substituting on lines 24 and 25, page 25 of what follows.
Ou aux députés d'une assemblée législative des renseignements. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt this motion? Yes! All those in favor of the motion will please say yay. Yay! All those opposed will please say nay. Nay! À mon avis, les non l'emportent.
My opinion, the nays have it.
The recorded division on the motion stands deferred. The question is on motion number 75. Mrs. Chagger, seconded by Ms. Petitpas-Taylor, moves that Bill C-76 in Clause 190 be amended by replacing lines 16 and 17 on page 99 with the following. C. The person who vouches does not reside in the polling division assigned to the same polling station as the polling division in which the other person resides, or in the.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt this motion? All those in favor will please say yay. All those opposed will please say nay. My opinion, the nays have it. The recorded division is deferred.
The question is on motion number 77. A vote on this motion applies to motions numbers 93 to 99 and 131 to 133.
If motion number 77 is rejected, we will have to vote on number 78.
7. Ms. Kuzi, seconded by Mr. Nader, moved that Bill C-76 in Clause 190 be amended by replacing line 30 on page 100 with the following. B. They knowingly make or publish a false statement in respect of a candidate in that election, a registered party that has endorsed a candidate in that election, or the leader of such a registered party, or.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt this motion? All those in favor will please say yay. All those opposed will please say nay. In my opinion, the nays have it.
Motion stands deferred.
The recorded division will also apply to motions number 93 to 99 and 131 to 133.
Question is on motion number 84. Ms. Kusi, seconded by Mr. Nader, moved that Bill C-76 in Clause 208.1 be amended by adding after line 24 on page 110 the following.
2.1. For greater certainty, an online platform shall publish in the registry referred to in subsection 2 the partisan advertising messages and election advertising messages of a third party for which the platform has sold, directly or indirectly, advertising space for an aggregate amount of $500 or more for the pre-election period or election period as the case may be.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? All those in favor of the motion will please say yay. Yay! All those opposed will please say nay.
My opinion, the yeas have it. The recorded division on the motion stands deferred.
The question is on motion number 115. Mr. Collin, appuyé motion number 115. Mr. Collin,
Mr. Cullen, seconded by Mr. McGregor, moved that Bill C-76 in Clause 268 be amended by replacing line 28 on page 166 with the following. 3. Section 437 of the Act is amended by adding the following after subsection 2. 2.1. The Chief Electoral Officer
may require the chief agent of a registered party to provide by a specified date documents evidencing any expenses set out in the party's election expenses return, including invoices, bank statements, deposit slips, and cancelled checks.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt this motion? All those in favor will please say yay. All those opposed will please say nay. In my opinion, the nays have it. The recorded division on the motion stands deferred.
Normally at this time, the House would proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded divisions at the report stage of the bill. However, pursuant to Standing Order 45, the recorded divisions stand deferred until Monday, October 29, 2018, at the ordinary hour of daily adjournment. Parliamentary Secretary has a point of order.
To canvass the House, you'd find unanimous consent to see the clock at 1:30, Madam Speaker.
Does the honourable member have unanimous consent to see the clock at 1:30? Agreed? So be it. Comme il est 13h30, la Chambre abordera maintenant l'étude des affaires émanant des députés selon l'ordre.
Private members' business, following the order indicated on the notice paper. Private members' business, second reading of Bill S-234, an act to amend the Parliament of Canada Act, Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate.
Designated a sponsor for Bill S-234, an act to amend the Parliament of Canada Act, Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate. Par conséquent, selon la déclaration.
Therefore, following the Monday statement, the bill will fall to the bottom of the priority list pursuant to Section 94(2)(c) of the Standing Orders.
House stands adjourned until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.